There is a world that was never meant to be understood, a world of fading fire and creeping dark, of gods who grew tired and mortals who refused to accept what that tiredness meant. Dark Souls 3 is, on the surface, a game about killing things. But beneath the armor and the bonfires and the fog walls, it is something else entirely, a vast and patient story told through the placement of a corpse, through a single line in an item description, through the way a boss moves when it thinks you're not paying close attention. Tonight, we are going to go through 135 of those secrets. 135 quiet moments where From Software hid something true and devastating inside what looked like a piece of furniture, or a set of trousers, or an enemy that you probably rolled past without a second thought. Let your shoulders drop. Let the tension you've been carrying around all day settle somewhere lower and softer. We are not in a hurry. The fire is fading, and we have all the time in the world. Part 1. The Foundation. What the fire hides. Before we get to the secrets themselves, it helps to understand the architecture of the lie. Dark Souls 3 takes place at the very end of a cycle that has been turning for an unimaginable span of time. The first flame, the source of all warmth, all disparity, all life as the gods knew it, is going out. It has gone out before. Every time it fades, someone is sent to rekindle it. Lords of Cinder, they're called. Men and women and things that were neither, who burned themselves alive at the base of the first flame so that the fire might continue just a little longer, so that the world might carry on in the shape that Gwyn, the Lord of Sunlight, decided it should take. And every time the fire fades again, the cycle repeats. That is the official version. That is what the opening cinematic tells you, and it is true in the same way that a lot of official things are true. Selectively, strategically, with enormous care taken to leave out the parts that would make people ask uncomfortable questions. Dark Souls 3 is set in Lothric, a kingdom at the end of all kingdoms, a place where all the great ages of fire seem to have converged. The geography of Lothric is not geography in any honest sense. It is geology made of history, layers of civilizations pressing down on one another, older eras pushing through the cracks of newer ones like roots through old stone. You can walk from a Victorian-ish castle directly into a swamp that feels prehistoric, and this is not lazy design. It is the game showing you something it will never say out loud, that time in this world is broken, that the weight of all those repeated cycles has fractured the very structure of reality. The 5 Lords of Cinder who were supposed to take their seats on the thrones at Firelink's shrine, the Abyss Watchers, Aldrich the Devourer of Gods, Wyhorm the Giant, the twin princes Lorien and Lothric, and the pygmy lords of the Ringed City, refused to return when summoned. Some fled. Some had ambitions of their own. Some simply did not care anymore. And that refusal is the wound through which the entire story of Dark Souls 3 bleeds. You play as the Ashen One, an unkindled, which is to say, someone who tried to link the fire in a previous cycle and failed. You burned, but not brightly enough. Your name was not written in any history. You were buried and forgotten. And then someone, something, reached down into the ash and pulled you back up and sent you out into Lothric to do what the Lords of Cinder would not. This is the frame. This is the picture we are looking at. Now, let us start noticing the details inside it, because From Software hid the real story in the corners and the margins. And that story is considerably darker and stranger and more heartbreaking than anything the opening cutscene was willing to tell you. Secret number 1. The coiled sword at the center of the bonfire in Firelink's shrine. You use it to access the game's first area, High Wall of Lothric, but its item description tells you something quietly unsettling. It is a fragment of the coiled sword found in the burning bodies of the Lords of Cinder. That means the bonfire at Firelink, the safe space, your home base, the place where the music is gentle and the firekeeper tends your wounds, is literally built on the smoldering remains of people who burned themselves alive to sustain the fire. The peace of Firelink is built on sacrifice. It was always built on sacrifice. Secret number 2. The firekeeper herself. She is blind. Not metaphorically blind. Not blind in the symbolic way that video game characters are sometimes blind to the truth. Her eyes have been removed. She was deliberately blinded so that she could not perceive the darkness that she serves as the threshold against. If she could see, she might understand what the fire actually costs, what linking it actually means, what the cycle actually does to the people caught inside it. The fact that she is kind and gentle and genuinely seems to care about you is one of the game's most quietly devastating ironies. Secret number 3. There is a set of eyes you can find in the untended graves, a hidden area we'll spend a great deal of time on later, called the eyes of a firekeeper. If you give them to her, she gains the ability to see. She does not become angry, she does not despair. She simply asks carefully if you might guide her toward an ending where the fire is allowed to fade, where the cycle is finally broken. The way her voice shifts in those conversations, the steadiness of someone who has accepted something enormous, is one of the most affecting pieces of voice acting in the entire game. Secret number 4. Look at the architecture of Firelink Shrine carefully. The building is incomplete. The tower attached to it has a locked door. The space feels less like a finished place and more like the impression of a place. A memory of what Firelink Shrine used to be, preserved in some in-between state that is neither fully present nor fully gone. This connects to one of the game's deepest structural secrets. Firelink Shrine exists outside of linear time. It is a remnant, or perhaps a composite, assembled from the echoes of every version of itself that ever existed across all the cycles. When the other Firelinks fell, this one was kept as a kind of sanctuary, a bubble of stability in a world that was coming apart at the seams. Secret number 5. The shrine handmaid who sells you items. She appears harmless, just an old woman in a rocking chair, but look at what she wears and what she knows. She has sets of armor from NPCs who have died, as though she was waiting for them. She refers to herself with a curious neutrality, neither warmly nor coldly. The prevailing theory among lore scholars, supported by her unusual resistance to the passage of time and her encyclopedic knowledge of the world, is that she is either immortal or that she is the same woman across multiple cycles, endlessly reborn into the same chair in the same shrine, endlessly waiting. Secret number 6. The covetous silver serpent ring, which increases souls gained from enemies, has a description that reads, "The snake is a recurring symbol in the legends of Lordran, but it is not a dragon. Beware the man who is not willing to risk losing his soul for what he wants." This is a direct reference to the serpent-like primordial serpents of the first Dark Souls, Frampt and Kyathi, the advisors who each told the chosen undead a different version of the truth. The fact that this ring exists in Lothric means the serpents, or at least their influence, has persisted across all those cycles. Someone has been advising humans toward one ending or another for a very, very long time. Secret number 7. The Estus Flask. It heals you. You know this. But the item description says it is the tears of a firekeeper, crystallized into liquid form. The warmth you drink to survive in this world is literally the distilled sorrow of a woman who cannot die and cannot stop seeing death. Every time you heal yourself in Dark Souls 3, you are drinking grief. Secret number 8. There is a small detail in the Firelink Shrine Cemetery area, the graveyard just outside the main building, that most players walk through without registering. Several of the graves there belong to unnamed unkindled, people who attempted to link the fire in previous cycles and failed, who burned without glory and were buried without anyone writing their names down. You are walking among your own predecessors. The path to the fire is, quite literally, paved with the graves of everyone who tried to walk it before you. Secret number 9. The throne in Firelink Shrine that you can sit on, the one Hawkwood occasionally sits in to look contemplative, is described as belonging to the unkindled, not to any Lord of Cinder, not to any god, to the unkindled, the people who failed. There is a reading of this detail that suggests the game always knew you would fail in the conventional sense, that your purpose was never really to link the fire or to become a Lord of Cinder, but to do something different, something none of the previous unkindled managed, something that might finally end the cycle rather than perpetuate it. Secret number 10. Hawkwood the Deserter. He is one of the most underrated characters in the entire game, a former member of the Abyss Watchers who left before the Legion's final sacrifice. He sits in Firelink Shrine being openly miserable, and honestly, that is refreshing. Unlike virtually every other character in this world, he does not have a hidden agenda or a secret plan. He is simply tired. He tried to be part of something meaningful and found that meaningful things have a habit of turning monstrous, and so he stopped. He gives you the Farron ring when you defeat the Watchers. He wants nothing else except, eventually, to find a dragon's scale and become something other than what he is. His arc, from deserter to dragon seeker, is one of the quiet redemptions the game tucks away where you will only find it if you talk to him enough times. Secret number 11. The Andre the Blacksmith. He's been in every Dark Souls game. He is here again, hammering away at his anvil in Firelink Shrine, and he will tell you, if you listen, that he has been doing this for a long time, longer than feels right. The implication, never stated directly, is that Andre is either immortal or that he too is one of those fixtures of the cycle, a constant that persists across iterations because the fire needs him to persist, because whoever is going to link the fire needs a blacksmith. He is a function as much as a person, and there is something quietly sad about that. Secret number 12. The gesture the Firekeeper teaches you, the beckon gesture, is identical in animation and description to gestures from previous Dark Souls games, as though the memory of how to call someone is so deeply worn into the world's muscle memory that it has survived every reset. Muscle memory. That is what the Age of Fire runs on. Repeated patterns, familiar shapes, the same gestures, over and over, across every version of the world. Secret number 13. The first bonfire you light in the game is not actually in Firelink Shrine. It is in the Cemetery of Ash, the ruined outdoor space where you wake up. When you light it, the game shows you a cutscene of the coiled sword being driven into the bonfire to activate it, which is functionally the game showing you a life being used as fuel. This happens in the first 30 seconds of Dark Souls 3. The tutorial teaches you the mechanics by asking you to perform the central moral act of the entire game's thematic argument, and it does not explain this to you until much, much later. Secret number 14. There is a corpse in the Cemetery of Ash holding a soul of a deserted corpse. This is a story told entirely through an item name. Wherever this person came from, whatever they were looking for, they are now a deserted corpse in a Cemetery of Ash, and their soul is the first you collect in this world. The game begins in a graveyard, collecting the souls of the unnamed dead. It could not be clearer about what it is, and yet somehow it always feels like a surprise. If you're enjoying falling down this particular rabbit hole with me, if the world of Lothric is pulling at something curious in you the way it pulls at me, consider subscribing and leaving a comment. Tell me your favorite piece of Dark Souls lore that most people miss. These videos take a long time to put together, and knowing the community is out there in the dark, listening makes every hour of it worthwhile. All right, let's keep going. Part 2. The Lords of Cinder. Who they really were. The game refers to them in the opening cinematic with a kind of reverence that feels almost ceremonial. The Lords of Cinder. The great ones who linked the fire, but spend any time with their actual stories. The item descriptions, the conversations, the environmental details scattered across the areas where they lived and died. And reverence becomes complicated. These were not heroes, or if they were heroes in the way that most heroes are when you look at them closely enough. Complicated, compromised, operating with motives that were never quite as pure as the stories said. Secret number 15. Yhorm the Giant, who guards profaned capital and who has one of the most immediately legible boss fights in the game, was not linked to the fire because he wanted to. Look at his soul description carefully, and at the description of the Swordmaster set worn by Sigward of Katarina. Yhorm was a ruler, a king of his people, who made a bargain. He would link the fire, he would sacrifice himself, to protect the subjects he governed, the people of profaned capital. He asked one trusted friend to hold the Storm Ruler, the only weapon capable of defeating him, so that if he ever became a Lord of Cinder gone wrong, if the Hollowing took him, that friend could come and put him down. That friend was supposed to be Sigward. And Sigward does come, eventually. He finds Yhorm and fights beside you, and afterward, if you've followed his quest properly, he sits beside the fallen giant and drinks his last bottle of Estus and dies quietly in the ruins of a place he promised his friend he would come to. Two old men keeping an ancient promise at the end of the world. It is genuinely one of the most affecting moments in the game, and you can miss it entirely because Sigward's questline is long and fragile and involves a well in the Cathedral of the Deep that most players fall into by accident. Secret number 16. The profaned capital itself carries a hidden history. The description of the profaned flame explains that the flame in the capital burns without consuming anything. an undying fire that refuses to follow the rules of fire, and that it corrupted everything it touched. The knights and royalty of the profaned capital were warped by this flame into the ash-covered giants you fight there, the gargoyles and the armored creatures in the upper areas. They did not fall to the abyss. They did not succumb to beast blood. They were consumed by a fire that should not have existed, a fire that broke the rules of what fire is allowed to do. And the origin of that profaned flame is connected to Pontiff Sulivan, a detail we will return to in great depth later. He discovered it as a young man, and instead of reporting it or leaving it alone, he used it as a foundation for his own rise to power. Secret number 17. The Cathedral of the Deep was never originally built for Aldrich. This is something the game implies but never states. The cathedral is enormous, grand, built with the craftsmanship of a place that was meant to be important before it became infamous. Its architecture, the towering vaulted ceilings, the enormous altar at its heart, speaks to worship of something other than what currently lives in its bowels. The prevailing theory, supported by item descriptions referencing older rites of the deep, is that the cathedral was originally a place for venerating the ocean, for communing with the primordial dark of the deep sea, and that Aldrich's followers repurposed it when they needed a home for their saint. Secret number 18. Aldrich himself began as a cleric, a holy man, someone who, in whatever era he came from, would have spent his days in prayer and contemplation and service. The description of his boss soul notes that when he ruminated on the fading of the fire, it inspired visions of a coming age of the deep sea. So, whatever corruption took him, it started with genuine theological contemplation. He was a man of faith who looked into the nature of the world honestly and concluded that the age of fire was over, that the deep dark was the natural successor to light. His cannibalism, his horror, grew from a sincere attempt to understand the world as it actually was rather than as he had been taught it should be. This does not excuse him, but it does complicate him in ways that make the game considerably darker. Secret number 19. The Deacons of the Deep, who serve as the first proper boss encounter after the cathedral, are not simply mindless servants. Their boss soul reads that they were entrusted with the key to the cathedral's inner sanctum, and that the key, over time, through proximity to the deep, corrupted them. They became what they worshipped. Look at the way the boss fight works. Countless robed figures clustering together, one lit up in red to indicate the true target, the collective acting as a single entity. It is a visual metaphor for how a group of individual people, each making small compromises, each taking another step towards something wrong, eventually becomes an undifferentiated mass of corruption. Secret number 20. There is a grave tender in the Cathedral of the Deep, the grave warden pyromancer boss found in the sewers below, whose soul can be transposed into a pyromancy called Black Flame, a dark fire magic that deals more damage than standard fire. The item description notes that this particular grave tender was once a wielder of ordinary flame who became a grave warden, a man who started with light and ended tending the dead in the dark. A small, forgotten story of personal decline, inscribed in a spell. Secret number 21. The Abyss. Watchers are not simply heroic warriors who sealed themselves away to preserve their vigil. They are among the most ambiguous of the lords, and the fight itself is designed to tell you this. Phase 1. 2. Abyss Watchers fighting each other. Some of them have red eyes, indicating Abyss corruption. The legion that was supposed to contain the Abyss was consumed by it from the inside, and by the time you arrive, they have been fighting each other for so long, in such an endless and meaningless cycle, that they have become a physical embodiment of the problem they were created to solve. They do not recognize you as an enemy. They just keep fighting whatever is in front of them, because that is what they have always done. Secret number 22. Hawkwood, as mentioned earlier, was one of these watchers. He deserted. His armor matches theirs except for the helm, which he wears differently, a small, deliberate detail to indicate that he has stepped outside the identity of the Legion, that he has stopped being an Abyss Watcher in a meaningful sense, even if he still wears their clothes. The Farron ring he gives you upon their defeat is described as extending the effect of the wolf's blood. He carries this ring but does not use it. He carries it the way people sometimes carry reminders of who they used to be, not to use them, but because throwing them away would require admitting something he is not yet ready to admit. Secret number 23. The Wolf Knight's Greatsword, obtainable by transposing the soul of the Abyss Watchers, is described as the sword of a knight tainted by the dark of the abyss, who mastered the wolf blood of Farron. That knight is Artorias the Abyss Walker from the original Dark Souls, or more precisely, his soul has been absorbed into the collective soul of the Abyss Watchers across generations of the wolf blood ritual. Artorias died in the first game's era. His legacy survived by being literally consumed by the people who idolized him. There is something deeply on the nose about that, and it is probably intentional. Secret number 24. The catacombs of Karthus, below Farron Keep, contain the remains of an ancient kingdom of warriors who worshipped a god of war and sacrifice. High Lord Wolnir, the enormous skeleton boss, is described in his boss soul as a conqueror who claimed the crowns of every god he defeated, eventually collecting enough divine power to attract the attention of the abyss itself. He fell to the dark while reaching for divinity. His outstretched hands in the boss fight, desperately clutching his 3 rings, are the hands of a man who understood at the last moment exactly what he had done wrong and could not stop doing it. Secret number 25. The Karthus Blood Ring, a highly coveted item that reduces your maximum health in exchange for an extended invincibility window during rolls, has a description that identifies it as belonging to the greatest of the Karthus warriors, who claimed that the arts of war are in the shedding of one's own blood. Literally, the Karthus warriors believed that making yourself bleed, making yourself vulnerable, was the foundation of martial excellence. They were right in a way the game acknowledges, and then gently mocks, because that philosophy ultimately led them into the arms of the abyss. Secret number 26. Yhorm's boss arena, the profaned capital, contains something easy to miss on a first playthrough. In the room adjacent to his fog wall, there is a woman's body slumped in a chair, dressed in the garb of the jailer women found in the Erethil dungeon. The description of the jailer set notes that the jailers are remnants of the profaned capital, tortured women who outlived everyone else. This specific woman made it out of Erethil dungeon and came back to profaned capital and sat down in a chair, and that was the end of her. She did not die fighting. She simply stopped. Secret number 27. The stray demon found in the Road of Sacrifices, technically optional and easy to avoid, drops an item that tells you it was the same type of demon found at the entrance to Undead Burg in the original Dark Souls. These are strays, demons that wandered from the Chaos Realm when the Flame Wars began, and in Dark Souls 3 they are clearly diminished, slower, sadder than they seemed in the first game. The Chaos Flame that gave birth to them is dying. Their power is dying. They are not guardians of anything anymore. They are just lost, wandering, going through motions they were designed to perform, even though the context that gave those motions meaning has long since collapsed. The deeper history of Yhorm the Giant. To understand Yhorm fully, you have to understand what the Profaned Flame actually is. The item description for the Profaned Flame pyromancy states that it was born from the ambitions of the sages of the Profaned Capital, human scholars who, deep in the underground city beneath Erethil, attempted to use the techniques of chaos fire to create a flame independent of the first flame, a fire that did not require the sacrifice of a lord of cinder. What they created instead was something worse, a flame that burned not from divine order, but from human transgression, from the refusal to submit to the cycle's terms. The profaned flame destroyed its creators and consumed the profaned capital, leaving it the ruin you walk through on your way to Yhorm's boss arena. Yhorm was the giant who ruled over that capital. His people died in the conflagration his scholars created. He linked the fire not as an act of nobility, but as an act of guilt, of responsibility for a catastrophe that began in his city under his rule, the Siegbrow and what it means. The questline involving Siegward of Katarina tracks a friendship across the entire game, a friendship between Siegward and Yhorm that predates the events of Dark Souls 3 by years. They made a promise together that if Yhorm ever lost his way, Siegward would come to set him right. The Storm Ruler, the weapon that is effective specifically against Yhorm, and which Siegward carries for this express purpose, is not a weapon of violence. It is the physical token of that promise. Siegward breaks through the floor of the prison where he is held specifically to get to Yhorm in time. He arrives half-drunk on Siegbrow, singing a drinking song, ready to fight his friend if his friend needs fighting. The boss fight against Yhorm, if Siegward is present, is accompanied by Siegward doing the one thing no one else in the game thinks to do. He mourns while he fights. He apologizes while he kills. He keeps the promise and hates that keeping it requires this. The Abyss Watchers and the Wolfblood. The Abyss Watchers, the Legion of Farron, are the most unusual of the Lords of Cinder in that they did not link the fire as individuals. They linked it collectively, all of them burning simultaneously, as an expression of the shared nature their wolf blood created. Artorias, the Abyss Walker's blood, passed from Artorias to the original Legion, and from them to all subsequent generations of Watchers, created a bond among the warriors that was more than institutional. They shared something physiological, something in the actual chemistry of their blood, that made the boundary between individual and group permeable. When one fell, the others felt it. When they linked the fire, they linked it as a single organism distributed across many bodies. The boss fight against the Abyss Watchers, in which the Watchers fight each other as the Abyss corrupts them, is the deterioration of that shared mind. The wolf blood failing under the pressure of hollowing, the collective consciousness fragmenting back into isolated individuals who can no longer tell friend from enemy. Aldrich's theological sincerity. The part of Aldrich's story that is most often overlooked is how it began. He was a cleric. He took his faith seriously. The age of the deep sea that he founded, the religion that developed around his consumption of people, was not a cynical power grab. He genuinely believed, and had visions that supported the belief, that the age of fire was ending, and that something deep and old was waiting on the other side of it. His theology was not wrong exactly. The deep is real. The age of fire is ending. His mistake was in reading the deep as something to be fed and appeased rather than understood, in interpreting his own appetite as divine instruction. The saint of the deep became the devourer of gods not through malice but through a sincere desire to prepare for what was coming, executed through a framework that was broken from the start. Part 3. Irithyll of the Boreal Valley. Ice, gods, and the man who broke both. There is a moment, on every playthrough of Dark Souls 3, when you crest a snowy ridge after defeating the Deacons of the Deep, and you see Irithyll for the first time. A city of blue-white towers reflected in a still lake, lit by the permanent cold twilight of a realm that doesn't quite follow normal rules about day and night, about seasons, about the ordinary progress of time. It is one of the most beautiful things From Software has ever made. It is also one of the most comprehensively terrible places in the game, and it is terrible in the specific way of places built by someone with great talent and no conscience. Secret number 28. Irithyll is not just a city that happens to have been built in a cold place. The cold is structural. Irithyll sits on or near Boreal Valley, a region described as a tundra that was always frozen, and the frost magic that permeates the entire area, the Pontiff's Knights, the water reserve, the road from the main gate to the cathedral, is derived from something older than Sullivan. The frost is the land itself asserting what it is. Sullivan found this place and made it his, but the cold belonged there first. Secret number 29. Pontiff Sullivan was born in the painted world of Ariandel, a pocket dimension we will explore in great detail later. This is stated in the lore for his great sword of judgment. He grew up inside a painting, in a world designed to be a refuge for the forlorn, and then he left. He walked out of that painted refuge and into the real world, and whatever particular cruelty he developed was shaped, at least in part, by having started his life in a place designed for outcasts, for the lost, for people who had no other place to go. He was one of those people, and then he decided he was something else entirely. Secret number 30. The two swords Sullivan wields tell you his entire story if you know how to read them. The profaned Ultra Greatsword in his right hand is tied to the profaned flame, the undying fire he discovered beneath the tundra as a young man, the fire that gave him his ambition, his conviction that he could claim power regardless of what the existing order said about who was allowed to have it. The Great Sword of Judgment. In his left hand is a blade derived from the deep, from Aldrich's domain, from the cold ocean dark that Aldrich preached. One sword is fire, one sword is dark. Sullivan in two hands holds the two competing eschatologies of Dark Souls 3, the profaned flame and the age of the deep, and he uses both indiscriminately. Secret number 31. The root-like wings that sprout from Sullivan's back in Phase 2 of his fight match the growth patterns of the clerics in Irithyll, who all have roots emerging from under their garments. The fat clerics, like Archdeacon MacDonald in Anor Londo, have roots growing from their eyes. And the pilgrim butterflies that drift around Lothric Castle have the same root-like wing structure. This root imagery connects all of these characters to a single source, and that source is the deep. The root-like connections are filaments of the deep dark, spreading through the faithful, physical evidence of Aldrich's influence growing through the bodies of those who serve his vision. Secret number 32. Irithyll Dungeon is the game's cruelest area by design, and it is cruel in a very specific, very intentional way. The jailers carry keys and lanterns. The prisoners in the cells have nothing. The jailers are the women of the profaned capital, the same women referenced on that corpse in Yhorm's arena, tormented into the role of tormentors, perpetuating the cycle of cruelty that destroyed their own lives. The dungeon is a machine for replicating suffering. Those who were victimized became instruments of victimization, not because they chose to be evil, but because the system was designed to ensure they had no other option. Secret number 33. The Outrider Knights. The powerful Frost-Wreath Knights who attack you in various places throughout the game, most memorably in the room near the Road of Sacrifices, where one appears to ambush you at the bottom of a ladder, are described in their armor set as Suleivan's loyal followers who were given special rings. Those rings, however, are not a reward. They are described as cursed rings that were forced onto the knights, rings that drove them into madness and frenzy, turning them into the feral, unstoppable weapons Suleivan needed but could not trust fully sentient knights to be. He turned his own soldiers into attack dogs, and the specific method by which he did it was a ring he called a Mark of Honor. Secret number 34. The Dancer of the Boreal Valley, one of the game's most visually distinctive bosses, is described in her armor as a distant relative of the old royal family of Irithyll. She is Guinevere's lineage, or close to it, which means Suleivan took a woman with divine blood in her veins and cursed her with the same Outrider ring, the same treatment he gave his expendable knights, and forced her into service as one of his weapons. The dancer was royalty. She dances because she is physically incapable of doing anything else, because the curse Suleivan placed on her has reduced her to a series of graceful, terrible movements, a queen made into a performance. Secret number 35. Yorshka, the company captain you find imprisoned on a tower in Anor Londo, is described as Gwendolyn's sister. Not his human sister, she appears to be a crossbreed, half dragon or half something not entirely human, deeply similar in description to Priscilla from the original Dark Souls painted world of Ariamis. Whether she is actually Priscilla's child or a separate creature of similar origin is deliberately ambiguous. What is not ambiguous is that Suleivan imprisoned her, isolated her from her brother, and kept her there while Gwendolyn was slowly devoured below her. She can hear the bells that the Blade of the Darkmoon Covenant rings. She cannot do anything about it. Secret number 36. The Silver Knights of Anor Londo, the same enemies you likely killed thousands of in the original Dark Souls, are still there in Dark Souls 3, still patrolling the same cathedral, still fulfilling their old duty. But their old master Gwendolyn is being eaten. They are protecting something that is in the process of being consumed, guarding a presence that is no longer their true lord, but is wearing their lord's body. They don't know. Or perhaps they do know and have no capacity to do anything differently, because the entire structure of their existence was built around this specific function, and they cannot stop performing it, even though the performance has become absurd. Secret number 37. In the water reserve, below the main level of Irithyll, you find Archdeacon MacDonald sitting in a corner beside a pool that the game implies is one of Aldrich's feeding stations. MacDonald appears dead, but is not. He is simply enormously obese, swollen almost beyond recognition, sitting in the filth of a place beneath the city's beautiful surface. He is described as one of the 3 archdeacons who escorted Aldrich to Irithyll. He is the one who stayed, the one who made himself the faithful guardian, who waited here in the dark while the others moved on to other purposes. His covenant sign, the Aldrich Faithful, is carved into the wall beside him. He worshipped a god of hunger and became hunger himself, a vast sedentary mass waiting in the cold. Secret number 38. The Pontiff's Candle Ring, which causes a phantom of you to appear before the enemies you fight, is described as one of the eyes worn around Suleivan's neck as a necklace, the brass medallion chain visible in his boss encounter. He wore his past victims around his throat. The enemies you dispatch using his ring technique are being defeated by something that looks like you, but is made of his collected trophies. Secret number 39. The road from the Pontiff's arena to the lake in Oolacile, the area where you fight the dozens of giant, shambling Oolacilians, is decorated with statues that appear to be worshipping something. On closer inspection, those statues are the same pose as the Silver Knights of Anor Londo, but frozen, stone still, positioned as congregants in a service they can no longer leave. The city of Oolacile is a cathedral, effectively. Every architectural choice serves the purpose of directed reverence toward Anor Londo above. Secret number 40. The bonfire at Distant Manor, one of the stranger bonfires in the game's geography, positioned at the edge of what seems like private grounds near the outer wall of Oolacile, corresponds to a manor house in the game that is never explained. Whose manor? Who lived there before Sullivan remade the city in his own image? The presence of church guardians there, the silver-masked women who also guard the entrance to Darkeater Midir in the Ringed City DLC, suggests that this was a place of significant spiritual importance, protected by guardians whose loyalties predate Sullivan's tenure by centuries. He built his new order on top of something older. The old something is still there underneath, if you know where to look. The geography of Oolacile as theological statement. Oolacile is the most visually arresting area in Dark Souls 3, and its design is not arbitrary. The city is built on a slope that descends from the Pontiff's Cathedral at its heights to the distant outline of what used to be Anor Londo at its far edge, with the frozen river running through it like a scar. This layout, the divine institution at the peak, the frozen wasteland at the base, the broken path connecting them, is the architecture of a religion in collapse. The city was built to express the continued vitality of Gwyn's legacy, to project the grandeur of the gods across a landscape that would make pilgrims feel appropriately small. What you find instead is a city full of dead and distorted things, its grandeur converted into a museum of what it used to be, its silver knights still patrolling the empty streets in service of a god that ceased to exist long before you arrived. Sullivan's dual blades and what they express. The Pontiff Sullivan fights with two swords, the profaned greatsword in one hand and the greatsword of the deep in the other. This is not aesthetic preference. It is philosophical declaration. The profaned greatsword channels fire and sin. It is the flame of human transgression, the fire that burns without divine sanction. The greatsword of the deep channels the corruption that devours souls. Sullivan holds one blade of human transgression and one blade of divine corruption simultaneously, in perfect balance. He is a man who looked at the two forces most threatening to the Age of Fire, the fire born of human refusal and the dark born of the deep, and decided that the correct response was to wield both rather than serve either. He is the most sophisticated political actor in the game, and also possibly the most dangerous. The Silver Knights and their vigil. The Silver Knights of Anor Londo, and by extension of Oolacile, were Gwyn's personal guard. They remained in the city after Gwyn linked the fire, waiting for his return, maintaining a presence in the empty halls of the gods. In Dark Souls 3, they are still there. They have been there for the entire span of the Age of Fire, waiting. They do not appear to have aged or deteriorated in any meaningful way. Their loyalty is the kind that has become indistinguishable from programming. They do not seem to know or care that the god they serve consumed himself as fuel a very long time ago. They serve the idea of the god in his absence. This is what faith looks like when the object of faith is gone, a silver knight patrolling an empty city, raising its spear at a hollow that wanders in from the frost. The irony of Yorshka. Yorshka, the illusory leader of the Way of Blue Covenant, is kept in a tower above the Anor Londo area of Oolacile. She cannot leave because her imprisonment prevents her. She does not fully understand why she is there. She believes she is in the tower to watch over the knights below, to be their spiritual guide. And she is kind, genuinely kind, in the way that makes her imprisonment more rather than less tragic. The reason she is imprisoned is that she is the sister of Gwyndolin, and her presence near Gwyndolin was a complication that Sullivan could not allow. Aldrich was consuming Gwyndolin slowly. Yorshka's proximity might have disrupted that process, or might have provided Gwyndolin with the will to resist. So, Sullivan put her in a tower, kept her company in the form of illusions, and told no one she was there. The woman who leads the covenant dedicated to protection cannot protect herself. The Covenant of Blue, which promises assistance to those who are invaded, is led by a prisoner who cannot be helped. Part 4. The Nameless King. A god who chose differently. You will not find him unless you are looking. The path to Archdragon Peak is hidden behind a gesture, a specific animation you have to perform at a specific location. And even many experienced players have reached the end of the game without ever climbing into those clouds, without ever facing the figure at the top. This is not an accident. The Nameless King is meant to be found only by those who are paying attention, who are willing to follow a thread of lore back to its source, who understand that the most important things in this world are the ones that have been deliberately hidden. Secret number 41. The gesture you need to reach Archdragon Peak is called the Path of the Dragon. You receive it from a dead pilgrim in the consumed king's garden, a body slumped in meditation, with their hands shaped in a specific mudra. To reach the peak, you must make that same shape with your own hands and hold it for several seconds at the dragon altar in Irithyll Dungeon or at the altar in Archdragon Peak's entrance. The game is asking you to perform an act of faith, to assume the posture of a dead pilgrim's prayer before it will let you into the area. You are not unlocking a door. You are completing a gesture of devotion. Secret number 42. The Nameless King's connection to Gwyn is implied through accumulated detail rather than stated directly. His crown description reads that it closely resembles that of the First Lord. His armor bears the same stylistic DNA as Gwyn's set. The lightning he wields is described as the primal lightning of the original Dragon Slayers, which Gwyn wielded, and Dragon Slayer Ornstein's armor is found in the area after defeating the Nameless King. Ornstein, who was the Firstborn's faithful first knight according to the Leo Ring in the original game. The constellation of evidence is too consistent to be coincidence. This is Gwyn's firstborn son, and every detail placed in this area was placed to help you arrive at that conclusion yourself. Secret number 43. Why did Gwyn's firstborn ally with the dragons? The dragons were his enemies. He helped build the civilization that destroyed them, and then he left his father's court, renounced everything, and went to live with the things he was raised to kill. The most persuasive reading of this is that the Nameless King looked at what his father did and recognized a kind of fraud in it. Gwyn used the power of his soul, his divine sunlight, to usurp a throne that had always belonged to the dragons. He did not destroy them so much as he displaced them, and convinced the world that displacement was victory. The Firstborn, who was on the ground for all of it, who led the Dragon Slayers in those battles, may have understood what he was actually participating in, and refused to participate anymore. He sacrificed everything, his name, his divinity, his place in history, to live with honesty about what the world actually was, rather than with the comfortable official story. Secret number 44. The King of the Storm, the Stormdrake who serves as the first phase of the Nameless King fight, died in the second phase. You kill the dragon, and then the Nameless King kills you, repeatedly, because the death of his companion has removed everything that was moderating his combat. He has been described as a god of war, someone who had respect only for arms and nothing else, someone who lived at such a constant extreme of martial focus that his closest relationship was with a creature he tamed by fighting. When that creature dies, what remains is just the war, stripped of everything that softened it. The Nameless King is grief made into a boss fight. Secret number 45. Dragon Slayer, Ornstein's armor in Archdragon Peak is arranged neatly, as though it was placed there deliberately rather than dropped in a fight. This suggests Ornstein came to the peak willingly, that he removed his armor and left it as an offering or a final gift. The theory, supported by the Leo Ring description's reference to Ornstein as the Firstborn's faithful first knight, is that Ornstein spent the time after the events of the original Dark Souls searching for his true master, the Firstborn rather than Gwyn, and eventually found him at Archdragon Peak. What happened when they met is unknown, but Ornstein's armor is there, cared for, laid out properly. Secret number 46. The Archdragon Peak area has no bonfire until you ring the Great Belfry Bell, which summons the Nameless King. Before that summoning, the area is peaceful, ancient stone, wind, the distant sounds of sleeping dragons. There is no hostility in the peak before you ring that bell. The drakes and the elder drake move around without aggression unless provoked. It is, functionally, a sanctuary, a place of genuine peace that exists outside the fire's influence, outside Gwyn's cycle, in the space that opened up when the nameless king walked away from the world below. You ring a bell to disturb that peace. You are, in the most literal sense, the aggressor here. Secret number 47. The Nameless King's moveset in Phase 2 heavily borrows from both Ornstein's attacks and from Gwyn's own patterns, as documented by players who compared all three fights side by side. He strikes with the same rhythms his father and his old knight struck with, even after all these ages of deliberate separation, even after everything he did to become something other than what Gwyn raised him to be. The body remembers. The violence was too formative to leave behind entirely. He is not his father's son anymore. He made sure of that, but he still fights like one. Secret number 48. The word nameless is doing extraordinary work throughout this game. There is the Nameless King. There is the furtive pygmy, described in the opening of the first Dark Souls as one of the lords of the original age, who sired the Dark Soul and soon the world. The pygmy who is consistently identified as the ancestor of humanity, and who is almost never named, who exists at the margins of every official history. Both of the most important figures in the mythology of this world, the father of humanity and the foremost among the dragon slayers, have been deliberately unnamed. History, this game suggests, is not about who was most important. It is about who was allowed to be remembered. Secret number 49. The covenant associated with the Archdragon Peak area, the Path of the Dragon Covenant, requires you to give dragon scales as offerings by sitting in meditation at a specific altar. You are, functionally, performing worship. The covenant mechanics are not just a way of getting rewards. They are the game's most direct method for having you inhabit the perspectives of the factions within its world. To be a member of the Path of the Dragon Covenant is to sit in the position of the Nameless King's followers, doing what they did, in the manner they did it, for the same reason. Secret number 50. The Lighting Storm miracle, which can be obtained by transposing the Nameless King's soul, has a description that reads, "Primal account of the former king and war god, known as the Nameless King, who, in the Age of Gods, was once a deity of war. Former king, that word, former, not just exiled, not just stripped of his name. He was a king. He held a throne, held authority, was the heir apparent of the most powerful god in the world, and he voluntarily walked away from all of it. This is not a story about a son who made a mistake and was punished. This is a story about a man who looked at what he was inheriting and decided he would rather have nothing, what the Nameless King's choice actually cost. Gwyn did not simply disown his firstborn, he erased him. The description of the Nameless King on the game's wiki and in various item descriptions makes clear that this was a total erasure. Records destroyed, name removed from divine genealogy, his very existence stricken from the official history of the gods. In a world where identity is constructed from what is remembered, where hollowing is the loss of self that comes from being forgotten or from forgetting, erasure is not a metaphor for death. It is worse than death. The Nameless King lost not only his divine status, but his history, his relationships, his place in any story anyone would tell. He became literally nameless, not unnamed, but denamed, stripped of the thing that made him a someone rather than a something, the Storm Drake and the bond it represents. The boss fight against the Nameless King is in two phases. In the first, you fight the king atop his mount, a massive storm-breathing wyvern called the King of the Storm. What makes this fight unusual is that the King of the Storm's health bar is the boss health bar. You are not fighting the Nameless King in Phase 1. You are killing his dragon. The Nameless King's reaction when the dragon falls is the emotional center of the entire boss encounter. He descends to stand before his fallen mount, he lowers his weapon, and he takes a moment. This is a man who gave up godhood for the company of creatures the gods considered enemies. The dragon he rides is, in some sense, the entire point of every choice he ever made. Watching him register its death, and then turn to face you, is one of the most effectively scripted moments of environmental storytelling in the game. Ornstein's connection to the peak. The armor of Dragonslayer Ornstein, the knight famous from the cathedral in Anor Londo, the boss of Dark Souls 1's most notorious fight, can be found in Archdragon Peak. Not his old armor, left behind as a relic. The lore description says he went to the peak to seek the king he had always served. Ornstein, one of Gwyn's 4 most trusted knights, was devoted not to Gwyn, but to Gwyn's firstborn son. He spent the entirety of the Age of Fire in Anor Londo, maintaining the illusion of a lived-in divine city, waiting for his king to return or to be found. When he finally left, after Gwyndolin's deceptions could no longer hold, after Anor Londo's pretenses had collapsed, he went to Archdragon Peak. Whether he found the king is not confirmed. Whether the nameless king knows what kind of devotion followed him all this way, while he was busy being erased from history, is a question the game does not answer and does not need to. The armor, alone on a peak at the top of the world, says everything. The path of the Dragon Covenant and what it seeks. The path of the Dragon Covenant is available through the Nameless King's area, and it is built around the gesture called the Path of the Dragon, a meditation posture adopted while sitting cross-legged, focused on the dragon head stone that allows players to manifest the armor of the ancient dragon. The Covenant's lore describes its members as humans who seek to transcend their human form by becoming something like the old dragons, not by worshipping them, but by transformation. By actually, physically attempting to become what the dragons were, beings of no fire and no dark, beings of neutral scale and stone, beings who exist outside the cycle entirely. The Nameless King sits at the center of this aspiration, not as its god, but as its exemplar. He chose the dragons. He is the proof that the choice can be made. The Covenant is full of people who looked at his story and decided that exile is acceptable if the alternative is the fire's endless cycle of burning. Part 5. Aldrich, the Deep, and what hunger actually becomes. The Cathedral of the Deep is built on the premise that the ocean is the truth. That light is temporary and warmth is borrowed time, and eventually everything, every flame, every civilization, every god, will be swallowed by the dark, cold water that was always underneath. Aldrich did not invent this philosophy. He found it in genuine theological contemplation and followed it to its conclusions with a thoroughness and a literal mindedness that turned a metaphor into a monster. Secret number 51. Aldrich began as a cleric with prophetic gifts. Before his transformation, he saw visions of the future when he prayed. His faith was genuine, his insights real, and his conclusion, that the Age of Fire was coming to an end and that something deep and dark would follow it, was not actually wrong. The tragedy is not that Aldrich was deluded. The tragedy is that he was largely correct, and that being largely correct about a dark truth does not give you permission to consume everyone in your path on the way to proving it. Secret number 52. The Cathedral of the Deep's architecture contains something that becomes clear on a second or third visit. The cathedral is underwater in a metaphorical sense. The lighting is blue-green, filtered as though through deep water. The giant monster in the sewers below, the abyssal thing that serves as a lurking threat in the lower depths, is fish-like, deep ocean-shaped. The entire building is designed to feel like submersion, like descent into cold, dark water. It is the future Aldrich preached, experienced as architecture. Secret number 53. Aldrich's full title is the Saint of the Deep and the Devourer of Gods. He was canonized. He was made a saint, which means a religious institution. The cathedral's organization, the deacons, the archdeacons, looked at a man who ate people and decided he was holy. They did this because his vision was compelling, his miracles were real, and because institutions have a long and terrible history of declaring their most powerful members holy rather than facing the implications of their power being wielded by someone monstrous. Secret number 54. The Life Hunt Seath miracle, obtainable by transposing Aldrich's soul, is described as a miracle he developed from dreaming. He was dreaming of a young, pale girl in hiding while he slowly consumed Gwendolyn. That girl is almost certainly Priscilla from the original Dark Souls painted world, a crossbreed of human and dragon, bearer of the Life Hunt Scythe, who existed in the painted world in hiding from a world that feared what she was. The implication is that Aldrich either found and devoured Priscilla before the events of Dark Souls 3, or that he was dreaming about her because she was next, and that her power passed into him through whatever metaphysical connection his dreaming established. Secret number 55. When you fight Aldrich, you are not fighting Aldrich alone. The body emerging from the dark sludge, the upper torso controlling the magic and the bow, that is Gwendolyn. Aldrich is using Gwendolyn's body as a puppet, channeling the god's divine magic through a corpse that is still, somehow, functional enough to fire arrows and cast spells. The reason Gwendolyn's arrows hurt so much is that they are actually his. He had the power to level half of Anor Londo when he was healthy. He is being used as a weapon against the person who came to stop the thing that is eating him. When you kill Aldrich, you are also ending whatever remained of Gwendolyn's suffering. Secret number 56. Gwendolyn's role in the original Dark Souls was to maintain the illusion of Anor Londo. After the gods left, after his father went to the kiln of the first flame, Gwendolyn stayed behind and used his illusion magic to make Anor Londo appear as it had always appeared, bathed in perpetual golden sunlight, his sister Guinevere seemingly still present, the illusion of divine authority still functioning. He maintained that performance for the entire first game, and likely for the time between games. He was the last one left, the keeper of a lie about the city's continued greatness, and he kept it beautifully, and he kept it alone. Secret number 57. The Darkmoon Covenant. The punitive phantom covenant whose purpose is to be summoned into the worlds of invaders and punish sinners, had its headquarters in Anor Londo with Gwendolyn as its patron. By the time of Dark Souls 3, Gwendolyn is being eaten. The Darkmoon Covenant is technically still active. Its sign-up captain is Yorshka, imprisoned in a tower, unable to leave, maintaining a covenant whose patron has been consumed. The Blue Sentinels and the Blades of the Dark Moon still respond to the Blue Eye Orb. Divine punishment still gets meted out. The institution outlived the god who founded it and kept functioning on institutional momentum alone. Secret number 58. The bones visible in Aldrich's sludge form are not just his bones. If you look at the floor of his arena, truly look, slow your frame rate or find a screenshot, you can see the skeletal remains of hundreds of consumed beings spread across the ground around him. He has eaten so many things for so long that his body has become a reliquary of everyone he ever destroyed. He carries the dead inside him. He is literally built of the people he consumed. Secret number 59. The description of the Deep Braille Divine Tome, one of the item descriptions that fills in the cathedral's pre-Aldrich history, mentions that the deacons of the deep learn long ago of the dangers of the deep, of the vast dark ocean that exists beneath the world, and that their original purpose was to understand and contain it. They failed at containment and became advocates for what they once opposed. This is a story as old as any institution. The people assigned to guard against a thing, who spend all their time studying that thing, who learn its arguments and understand its logic, and who eventually stop opposing it because they have come to understand why it is compelling. Secret number 60. Archdeacon Royce. One of the 3 archdeacons whose ashes you can find and give to the shrine handmaid for new items, is never encountered in the game proper. His ashes are found in the Cathedral of the Deep. He was the administrative head of the cathedral, the organizer, the bureaucrat of Aldrich's worship. His role in the hierarchy was to make the saints' indulgences run smoothly, to ensure that the right number of sacrifices were prepared, that the correct protocols were maintained. He was the mundane machinery that made a saint's atrocities possible. He is a recruitment in the game only as Ash. Secret number 61. The Aldrich Faithful Covenant requires you to stand in the water reserve area beneath Anor Londo and be summoned into other players' worlds as a dark spirit to protect Aldrich's slumber. When you are summoned, you appear in the invaded world as a purple phantom, the color associated with covenant-based dark spirits. But your purpose is described specifically as guarding the approach to Anor Londo. You are part of the protective system that kept Gwendolyn imprisoned. By joining this covenant, you become one of the mechanisms of that imprisonment. Secret number 62. There are giant worms in the swamp of Farron Keep. Their description in item drops identifies them as the Karthus sandworm, remnants of the old Karthus bloodline that were transformed by the Abyss corruption, infusing the entire Farron region. The worms are what Karthus warriors became when the Abyss consumed them so thoroughly that their humanity was almost entirely gone. They are physically enormous, but spiritually almost nothing. Vast, mindless masses of transformed flesh doing what corrupted things always do in this world, which is attack whatever moves near them. The Cathedral of the Deep's architectural meaning. The Cathedral of the Deep is not just a dungeon. It is a monument to the inversion of faith. The building is designed on the same architectural principles as the great cathedrals of Anor Londo. The stained glass, the vaulted ceilings, the processional spaces built to make worshippers feel appropriately small before the divine. But what is worshipped here is not a god of sunlight. It is a god of consumption. The giants slumbering in the courtyard outside, the deacons in their robes performing their devotions, the clerics of the deep practicing their dark miracles. This is a fully functional religious institution, and what it worships is the appetite that Aldrich embodies. The cathedral is the soul's universe's most precise image of a religion that has gotten it precisely, devastatingly wrong. Gwyndolin's condition when you find him. If you enter the chamber where Aldrich has been feeding on Gwendolyn, and the game gives you this opportunity as a separate encounter from the Aldrich boss fight itself, what you find is not a body. It is an ongoing consumption. Gwendolyn is still alive, still conscious, still capable of recognizing you and speaking to you inside Aldrich's distended, darkened form. He has been being eaten, slowly, for an unspecified but clearly extended period. He thanks you for coming. He does not ask to be saved. He has accepted what is happening to him, the way a very old person sometimes accepts something that cannot be stopped. The son of Gwyn, who maintained the fiction of his father's city for the entirety of the Age of Fire, who hid in Anor Londo, sustaining illusions because he could not stop caring about what his father built, dies being slowly consumed by a man who dreamed of a pale girl and ate in her direction until he arrived at the real thing. Life hunts Seath and its origin in Priscilla's dream. Aldrich was visited, in his long feast, by dreams of a pale girl in a world of painted snow. These dreams are the game's direct reference to Priscilla, the crossbred daughter of a dragon and a god who was locked in the painted world of Ariamis in the original Dark Souls. Priscilla carries the life hunt scythe, a weapon that slices life directly, that drains life force rather than dealing physical damage. Aldrich absorbed this weapon into himself through dreaming about its owner, through the specific quality of hunger that had expanded to encompass not just what he could eat, but what he could imagine eating. The life hunt scythe, used in Phase 2 of the Aldrich boss fight, is the culmination of hunger that has gone past the physical, a weapon of desire for something you have never touched but cannot stop imagining. The deep and the deacons as a collective. The Deacons of the Deep, the boss fight before the Aldrich encounter in Anor Londo, is fought against a swarm of robed clerics rather than a single imposing figure. The boss health bar belongs not to any individual deacon, but to the collective. Whoever among the swarm is currently designated as the host of the entity that connects them. When one deacon dies, the entity moves to another, the glow transfers, and the fight continues. This mechanic expresses something specific about how the Deep functions as a religious institution. It is not hierarchical. There is no single leader because the Deep is not a belief that requires a leader. It is an experience that spreads through contact, through proximity, through the gradual erosion of individual will by something older and more collective. The deacons are not individuals who chose the Deep. They are individuals who were absorbed by it, slowly, until there was not enough of each one left to distinguish one deacon from another. Part 6. Londor, Hollows, and the Usurpation Conspiracy. Londor is never shown. You do not visit it. There is no zone labeled Londor on any map. It exists only as a name on pilgrims' lips, a place described as a nation of hollows, a kingdom built by and for the undead who have given up hope of ever reversing their curse, who have decided that being hollow is not a disease to be cured, but a state of being to be inhabited with dignity. Everything that Londor wants, everything it is working toward, arrives in Firelink Shrine wearing a black dress and carrying a sword. Secret number 63. Yoel of Londor, the first agent of the Sable Church you meet, is dying when you find him. He is part of a group of pilgrims who were traveling to Lothric for the same reason most pilgrims travel toward fire, to offer themselves, to give themselves to the flame, to reduce themselves to ash in service of the linking. He has outlived all his companions. He is the last one. And when you find him, rather than continuing toward that sacrifice, he attaches himself to you and offers you something genuinely unusual, free levels in exchange for your growing hollowing. Each time he levels you, he gives you a dark sigil, a mark of the abyss burned into your soul. You hollow a little more with each death, and he is watching this process with what can only be described as professional satisfaction. Secret number 64. Yoel dies and is replaced by Uria of Londor, and this transition is described in the most mundane way possible. He simply stops moving one day, and she is there instead. She acknowledges him briefly. "My dear Yoel," she says, his service complete, and moves on. He was a tool of the Sable Church in the most literal sense. His purpose was to make contact with an unkindled of sufficient promise to begin the Dark Sigil sequence, and to disappear when that sequence was in motion. Whether he actually died of natural causes, or whether the Church's plan required him to be finished once his function was complete, is something the game will not tell you. But Uria's complete composure about it is notable. Secret number 65. Uria herself is one of 3 sisters who founded the Sable Church of Londor. The oldest sister is Elfriede, better known to Dark Souls 3 players as Sister Friede, the final boss of the Ashes of Ariandel DLC. The youngest sister is Liliane, who appears only in the cutscene for the Usurpation of Fire ending, a fleeting presence in a moment of triumph. The 3 sisters founded a church specifically to facilitate the single event they have been working toward across multiple cycles, the Usurpation. They built an entire institution for one purpose, and Uria is the one who stayed to see it through. Secret number 66. The dark sigils Yoel gives you are described as brands of the undead, a dark sign variant, a mark of the abyss, and they cause you to hollow every time you die, but they also function as keys. They open the possibility of the Usurpation ending. They are the Church's mechanism for ensuring that when the right person comes along, an unkindled who is willing to carry the dark soul, the path is already being prepared in their flesh. Yoel was making you into a vessel from the moment he met you. Secret number 67. The wedding ceremony for the Usurpation ending takes place in the Dark Moon Tomb, the chamber beneath the rotating stairs that lead to Anor Londo. This chamber was Gwyndolin's sanctuary, a private space beneath the throne of gods, a place of moondark worship. You perform a hallowing ritual wedding, an act that would have been anathema to every principle Gwendolyn stood for, in the room that was most intimate to him, while his body is being consumed above. The game's eye for symbolic location never fails. Secret number 68. Henri of Astora, your intended in this ceremony, is one of the most poignant characters in the game regardless of which ending you pursue. Their quest is to find and kill Aldrich in revenge for the destruction of their hometown. They are gentle, determined, and almost entirely doomed to lose their partner Horus, doomed to be manipulated by the pilgrim who serves Londor, doomed to die in the ceremony if you proceed with the usurpation path. The fact that Henri is gender-locked to be opposite your character's gender, always presented as a potential romantic partner, makes the ceremony's violence feel intimate in a way that pure boss fights never do. Secret number 69, Horus the Hushed. Henri's traveling companion, a taciturn warrior who communicates only in gestures, has one of the game's quietest tragic arcs. He hollows in the catacombs of Carthus, trapped in a dead-end cave, and by the time you find him, he is hostile and mindless, and you have to put him down. If you tell Henri where he is, she goes there too, and you will later find her hollowed in that same cave. The catacombs hollowed them both. Their partnership, which seemed defined by Horus's quietness and Henri's warmth, ends in a cave where neither of them could talk their way out. Secret number 70. The Pale Shade of Londor, a dark spirit who invades you in Farron Keep and Irithyll if you have progressed Uria's questline, but subsequently angered her, is described as one of Uria's assassins. If you go off script with the Church's plan, if you try to deviate from their path, they send someone to kill you. The Pale Shade wears white robes and fights with a paired sword style identical to Uria's. The Church built redundancy into their plan. If you will not walk the path voluntarily, they will walk you off the edge of it. Secret number 71. Reaching the usurpation ending requires you to essentially do 2 full playthroughs worth of setup in a single run. Managing Yoel's sigils before the catacombs trigger his death, maintaining Uria's questline, completing Henri's entire arc, and then performing the ceremony. Most players do not get this ending on their first playthrough. Most players do not get it on their second. This difficulty is itself thematic. The Sable Church has been working toward this for multiple cycles. The cycle in which their plan fully succeeds requires extraordinary intentionality from the unkindled who carries it out. Secret number 72. The usurpation ending cutscene is quiet. No dramatic music, no transformation. You sit down on the First Flame's throne, and the light goes out, and you become the Lord of Hollows, the first Hollow to sit the throne of the First Flame, to carry it rather than burning in it, to usurp its power rather than being sacrificed to it. Uria and Liliane kneel to you in the darkness. Whether this is good or terrible, or something else entirely, is something the game will not adjudicate for you. It shows you the choice and the consequence, and it lets you decide what it meant. Uria's three sisters and what divides them. Uria of Londor, who guides you through the usurpation quest line, has two sisters, Elfriede and Liliane. The three were trained together as Blades of the Dark Moon, assassins in Gwendolyn's service, before Uria led them to Londor and the Sable Church. What happened between them afterward is told entirely through implication and item descriptions. Elfriede left Londor and became a sister of the Painted World, eventually rising to become its Frida, the Ash Maiden who chose a world of frozen stasis over the messy, human project of Londor's revolution. Uria stayed and built the Sable Church into the institutional force behind the usurpation. Liliane remained with Uria, the loyal one, who never questioned the path they were on. Three sisters who began in the same place, trained in the same craft, and ended at opposite ends of the world's moral argument. Uria fights for the fire to be claimed. Elfriede fights for the world to stop. Liliane fights for Uria, the Hollow's perspective on the dark sign. Yoel of Londor, the pilgrim who offers you free levels in exchange for your hollowing, frames the dark sign differently than any other character in the game. Where the mainstream of the Age of Fire treats the dark sign as a curse, and as the mark of the condemned undead, the brand of those who failed to die properly, Yoel and the Sable Church treat it as a seal on something valuable. The dark sign does not create the dark soul, it constrains it. The hollowing that accelerates with each death is not a deterioration of the self, but the removal of the constraints, the divine prohibitions, the social conditioning, the institutional roles that have been placed over the dark soul to keep it manageable. A fully hollow person is, in Londor's theology, a fully free person, someone from whom everything that was put onto them by the fire's order has been stripped away, leaving only the irreducible dark of what they actually are. Henri's parallel arc and what it reveals. The questline involving Henri of Astora runs parallel to the Londor questline in a way that requires you to see both to understand either. Henri and Horace, two orphans raised by a holy knight, are seeking Aldrich for vengeance. Horace goes hollow and turns on Henri. Henri presses forward alone, becoming progressively more hollow, more isolated, more clearly someone who has come too far and lost too much to stop. If you follow the Londor questline, Henri's fate is determined by a pilgrim who kills them in secret so that you can use their soul as a vessel for the usurpation ceremony. Henri's entire arc, from determined survivor to sacrificed hollow, happens off-screen, decided by a political faction that never spoke to them, in service of an ending they would not have chosen. They were an orphan used as fuel for someone else's revolution. The game does not comment on this. It simply shows you the empty grave. Part 7. The Grand Archives and the Twin Princes above Lothric Castle, behind a field of statues come to life and a bridge held by dragonfire, is the Grand Archives. The great library of Lothric, the repository of all the knowledge the kingdom accumulated across its history. It is, in every aesthetic sense, an attempt to make a place feel important and permanent. And it has been utterly abandoned. The scholars who once worked here have been transformed into something between undead and hollowed, blue-faced and wax-sealed, wandering through the stacks they used to organize with nothing left of their original purpose, except the shapes their bodies maintained as the light left their eyes. Secret number 73. The Grand Archives contain a mechanic as strange as anything in the game. There are wax basins scattered through the upper floors, and you can dip your head in the wax. If you do, you become temporarily immune to the curse effect that the reading glowing scholars inflict with their gaze. The game does not tell you this. There is no tooltip. You have to either discover it through experiment or hear about it from someone who discovered it for you. The wax protects against madness. The knowledge stored here is madness-inducing. The scholars who studied this library apparently coated themselves in wax to continue working without breaking, and eventually the coating did not matter because they were already gone. Secret number 74. The statues outside Lothric Castle are pus of man, humans who have been so thoroughly consumed by the abyss that their flesh has erupted into writhing dark tendrils, their human shape just barely visible inside the corruption. They are everywhere in the late game, these frozen-seeming humanoids that suddenly burst into horrifying life when you get close. They are described in item descriptions as humans in whom the dark of the abyss was always latent and eventually overwhelmed everything else. The dark lives in every human being, the game suggests. Most people contain it. Some people are consumed by it. The line between those two groups is thinner than it looks. Secret number 75. The Crystal Sage who serves as a mid-game boss actually has a twin. The soul description of the Crystal Sage notes that the twin Crystal Sages once served as spiritual guides to the scholars of the Grand Archives, and that one went on to ally with the undead Legion of Farron. The boss you fight in the Road of Sacrifices is one of them. The other lived among the Abyss Watchers, contributing their magic to the Legion's hunt. They are sisters, and they chose opposite sides of a conflict between the structures of Lothric and the structures of Farron, one serving scholarship, one serving war against the Abyss. The game presents them as enemies, but their histories suggest they were once the same person's equivalent, counselors to power. Secret number 76. Oolacile, the Consumed King, the optional boss found in the Consumed King's garden below Lothric Castle, was Lothric's father. He was a scholar king who became obsessed with dragons, with Seath the Scaleless from the original Dark Souls, with the idea of becoming a scaleless drake himself, a human who achieved the immortality of a dragon without actually being one. His transformation was incomplete, which is worse than a complete transformation. He is not a dragon. He is a man in the process of becoming one, which means he is neither fully, which means his mind is a catastrophe. He cradles an invisible child during his boss fight and refers to his child Oolacile, a child that, by the time you arrive, does not appear to exist in any visible form. Secret number 77. Oolacile of Oceros is the most invisible character in Dark Souls 3, present only as an empty space in a mad father's arms and a name in an item description. The undead dragon in the Consumed King's garden drops the Path of the Dragon gesture, which suggests that the dragon transformation experiments Oceros was performing extended beyond himself, that there were test subjects, that Oolacile may have been one of them, that the child whose absence Oceros mourns may have been consumed by whatever experiment finally broke the king's mind. None of this is confirmed. All of it is there in the margins. Secret number 78. Gwynevere, Gwyn's daughter, the Princess of Sunlight, the enormous golden woman you met in the original Dark Souls, is implied by item descriptions to be Lothric's queen. The Lothric knight armor set refers to the royal bloodline, and the twin princes' lore makes reference to their mother as someone of godly lineage. If Gwynevere is their mother, she married twice after Gwyn, first to flame god Flann, as noted in Dark Souls 1's Sun-Princess ring, and then to King Oceros of Lothric. She has been, across the entire arc of these games, a woman who watched every husband become something terrible in pursuit of fire. Secret number 79. Lorien was crippled by his younger brother's curse before the game begins. Before that, before Lothric was born with his frailty and his prophecy, Lorien was a knight who single-handedly killed the demon prince, a feat the game acknowledges with deep respect, not because it was necessary for the kingdom, but because it was genuinely extraordinary. He was already a warrior of remarkable ability when his younger brother's existence changed everything. The great sword he wielded was scorched permanently by the demon's flame in that fight. He carries that scar into every subsequent battle. Secret number 80. The boss fight with the twin princes is structured to make one thing absolutely clear. Lothric does not fight. He never raises a hand in the first phase. He sits on his brother's back in the second phase and channels power through him. The combat, the violence, the sacrifice, these are all Lorien's. Lothric contributes intellectually. He directs. He enhances. He resurrects his brother each time you kill him, dragging Lorien back from death with what the game describes as their curse, making their souls nearly inseparable. Lothric never chose to link the fire. He also never let his brother die. The most accurate way to describe the relationship is that Lorien died for Lothric's refusal and then was not permitted to stay dead, the wax and what it costs. The mechanic of dipping your head in wax to protect against the mind-altering effects of the Grand Archives books is, in lore terms, a description of what knowledge in Lothric actually does. The books in the Grand Archives are not simply repositories of information. They contain, by implication of their effect, direct experiential records, not accounts of the Age of Fire, but something closer to its essence compressed into text, readable by the mind in a way that bypasses understanding and goes directly to effect. Reading the books of the Grand Archives is not learning about the flame. It is touching the flame, intellectually, at a level of intensity that most minds cannot survive. The scholars who sealed their heads in wax were not protecting against boredom or difficulty. They were protecting against the direct experiential impact of knowledge that should not be possible for a human mind to contain. The twin princes as a single entity. Lorien and Lothric are fought as a single boss, despite being two people. And the mechanics of the fight reflect what the lore tells you about them. They are functionally a single organism. Lorien took Lothric's curse into himself voluntarily, through a transference that rendered him mute and unable to use his legs effectively, so that Lothric could continue to exist without being destroyed by his own hereditary burden. In the fight, Lothric rides on Lorien's back and cannot be permanently killed. Every time you kill Lothric, Lorien rises to resurrect his brother at the cost of his own health. The boss fight is not a combat encounter. It is the game asking you to watch two people keep each other alive against all reasonable expectation, through a devotion that has nothing to do with duty or heroism, and everything to do with the specific stubbornness of love that has decided it will not be defeated by something as ordinary as death. The Scholar of the First Sin reference, hidden in the archives. Among the texts in the Grand Archives, there are references to a scholar who came from outside Lothric, from Drangleic, the Kingdom of Dark Souls 2, bringing research on the nature of the curse and the soul. This scholar is implied to be Aldrich, the Scholar of the First Sin from Dark Souls 2, who spent his entire life attempting to understand the cycle through the distillation of its fundamental nature. His research is in the archives because Lothric collected everything. Whether his conclusions, that the cycle is inescapable but that individual lives within it, can still have meaning, which is more or less the argument of Dark Souls 2's endings, influenced the thinking of Lothric's scholars is not confirmed, but the presence of his work in the collection of all knowledge that Lothric preserved before the fire went out suggests that the question he spent his life asking was considered, at least, worth keeping. Part 8. The Painted World. Ariandel and Sister Fried, Painting as World. World as Painting. The conceit has been in this series since the original Dark Souls and its painted world of Ariamis. That reality in this setting can be compressed into art. That sufficient belief and pigment and intention can make a dimensional space that is fully real while also being fully contained within a canvas. Ashes of Ariandel, the first DLC for Dark Souls 3, is set inside one of these painted worlds. It is a winter landscape, a refuge for the forlorn, a place that has been allowed to rot and freeze in the service of one woman's conviction that nothing should ever change. Secret number 81. The painted world of Ariandel is not the same as the painted world of Ariamis from the original Dark Souls. It is a later painting, a different artist's attempt to make the same kind of space. The original Ariamis presumably decayed or was otherwise lost. Painted worlds, we learn in Ariandel, require maintenance, require fire to renew them when they begin to rot. Ariandel is the name of the monk who keeps the current painting alive, who has been beating himself with a flail in the painting's largest building as penance for something, sustaining the flame of the painting through his own suffering. Secret number 82. Sister Fried arrived in the painted world as a refugee. She was a member of the Sable Church of Londor, Uria's oldest sister, who fled the church after attempting and failing to usurp the flame herself. She came to Ariandel looking for peace, for a place to hide from failure, and she found it, and then she decided to protect it. And then she decided to protect it so thoroughly that she convinced Father Ariandel to stop maintaining the flame and let the painting rot, rather than allow any change that might disturb the quiet she had found. Secret number 83. The frost-white ash that blankets Ariandel's landscape is the rotting painting. Snow in the real world is crystallized water. The ash snow of Ariandel is the crystallized decay of a world that is dying for want of fire. Every beautiful white field you walk through is the painting composting itself. Friede walks through a world that is actively decomposing and calls it peaceful. Secret number 84. Father Ariandel's boss fight is in two phases. A first phase where he is on his knees, passively enduring your attacks, and a second phase where Sister Fried is revealed as the true combatant, who then fights alongside a resurrected Ariandel in the third phase. Ariandel himself, throughout this fight, is being asked to do something he was conditioned to do: burn, create fire, sustain the painting, and Frida is fighting to prevent that from happening. She is using him as a weapon against the thing she convinced him to stop doing. The tragedy is not that Ariandel is fighting you. The tragedy is that he is performing his true function even here, even in this corrupted form, even with Frida directing him. Secret number 85. The Corvians, the crow-headed, crow-bodied creatures that inhabit Ariandel, are the painting's native people. Their lore describes them as beings who were originally human, who came to the painted world looking for a home, and whose transformation into crow shapes reflects how thoroughly they have become part of the painted world's nature. They are loyal to the painter, the young woman who is, in theory, the next person to paint a world, because she represents their purpose, the creation of a new place for the forlorn to inhabit. Secret number 86. The Corvian storyteller enemies, the ones that summon crow phantoms and cast spells, are described as using illusion magic to tell stories about hollows and their suffering. They are the propagandists of Ariandel. They spread the narrative that draws lost souls into the painting and keeps them there. Liliane, the youngest sister of the Sable Church, is described in Uria's lore as a storyteller who performs the same function for Londor. Both factions, Ariandel and Londor, maintain their populations through stories about the dignity and validity of being hollow. The story is the institution's most powerful tool. Secret number 87. Sister Frida wields the Freed's great scythe, a frost-bladed weapon she developed over her time in the painting, but she also uses pyromancy in the third phase, a talent she carries over from her Londor background. She is a pyromancer wearing frost. Her fundamental nature and her adopted identity are in direct contradiction with each other, and the fight literalizes that contradiction. By the time you face her at full power, she is throwing fire with one hand and frost with the other, and they are not balanced. They are just simultaneous. Secret number 88. The painter who is the central hope of the DLC, the young woman whose new painting will give the world's people a fresh start, is never named in the game. She is simply the painter. She refers to Gale as Uncle Gale, an affectionate title rather than a literal kinship. She knows she is in a painting. She knows the painting is decaying. She is calm about this with the specific equanimity of someone who has access to a large enough perspective to be calm. She knows a new world is coming because she is going to make it. Her serenity is not naivety. It is craft. Secret number 89. The specific description the painter gives of the world she wants to create is cold, dark, and very gentle. This is not accidentally close to several descriptions used for the Age of Dark in various Dark Souls games. It is not coincidentally similar to how the deep is described in certain item texts. She is not painting the next Age of Fire. She is painting the beginning of something that has never been allowed to exist before. A world where the dark is not an enemy, not a crisis to be averted, but a climate, a temperature, a weather. Secret number 90. The rope black firebomb found in Ariandel has a description noting it was modified for use in the painting, where ordinary fire would endanger the world. Every item in Ariandel has been adapted to the painting's constraints. The ecosystem of the DLC is adapted to the specific rules of a painted reality. This is the most detailed world building in the DLC's design, not just that the painted world exists, but that existing inside it changes the properties of ordinary things. How the painted world decays. The painted world of Ariandel is dying because it has been inhabited too long without renewal. The painted worlds of the Dark Souls universe are not permanent. They are artworks that sustain themselves through their own integrity, and like all artworks, they age. The snow of Ariandel is ash because the world's paint is breaking down, the pigment separating and fading, the vision the original artist intended becoming indistinct at its edges. Painted worlds require occasional burning, a total cleansing of the old image so that a new one can be made, to prevent this deterioration. Frida refuses to allow the burning because Ariandel is a place of asylum, a place where outcasts and exiles found refuge, and burning it would destroy not just the place but the people who fled there when nowhere else would have them. Elfrida's actual identity. The revelation that Sister Frida is Elfride, one of Uria's sisters, the third blade of the Dark Moon who left Londor's revolution behind, recontextualizes everything about the Ashes of Ariandel DLC. Frida did not come to the painted world to preserve it out of abstract benevolence. She came to it to stop. She had been one of Londor's revolutionaries, trained as an assassin, involved in the project of ending the fire's cycle through the usurpation, and she decided at some point that the project was wrong. Not wrong in its diagnosis, but wrong in its method. Wrong in its insistence that the correct response to a world dying under the fire's oppression was to replace the fire rather than to find a place of stillness outside its reach. The painted world was that stillness. She chose peace over revolution. The game does not tell you clearly whether she was right. Father Ariandel and his guilt. Father Ariandel, the enormous figure you find in the depths of the painted world's most ruined area, is the man who last attempted to burn the world and could not finish the job. He knows the world needs to be burned. He has known it for years. He has taken the destruction of the world into his own body. His wounds are self-inflicted, kept open, a constant act of penance for his failure to do what the world needed. He is whipping himself with a metal flail not out of madness, but out of guilt, so old and specific that it has become ritual. He agreed with Frida. He could not bear to destroy the world that shelters outcasts. His choice to stay the fire of renewal, repeated across decades until it became the condition of his existence, is visible in every wound on his enormous body. The painted world and the ringed city as mirror endings. The ashes of Ariandel and the ringed city DLCs are structured as mirrors of each other. The first asks the question, what happens when you refuse to let a dying world burn? The second asks, what happens when you follow the fire all the way to its absolute end? Frida's world is frozen because she would not let it burn. The ringed city is ash because the fire burned everything. The correct answer is not found in either extreme. Neither total preservation nor total consumption produces a livable world. The painter, making her new world from the pigment of both extremes, is the synthesis, a world made with intention, from the truth of what the dark actually is, designed to be honest rather than sustained by the fear of what ending means. Part 9. The Ringed City. The end of everything, at the very end of time, at the place where all worlds converge as the last fire goes out. There is a city. It was built at the beginning of civilization, placed at the margin of the world, and left there, and now that the margin has become the terminus, it is both the oldest place and the last place simultaneously. The Ringed City's DLC is the conclusion of the entire Dark Souls narrative, and it earns that conclusion by being genuinely strange, genuinely sad, and genuinely willing to say things about power and sacrifice and the management of people that the rest of the series only approached obliquely. Secret number 91. The Ringed City was built by Gwyn as a gift to the Pygmies, the descendants of the furtive pygmy who sired the Dark Soul, who are therefore the ancestors of all humanity, to contain the Dark Soul and keep it away from the cycle of fire. He gave them a city at the end of the world, installed his youngest daughter Filianori there as a guardian and ally, surrounded it with the most powerful knights he had ever created, and essentially told humanity, here is your place, and it is at the edge, and it is away from everything that matters. This is presented as magnanimity, and it is closer to exile. Secret number 92. Filianori is asleep when you find her, sitting in a chamber deep in the Ringed City's inner sanctum, clutching a rotten egg to her chest. Her night guardian Shira tells you she must not be woken, that she lies at the edge of fire and dark for the sake of man. What this means, practically, is that Filianor's presence, her divine power, her status as Gwyn's daughter, functions as a kind of temporal anchor for the Ringed City, keeping it preserved in an age-old stasis, insulated from the deterioration that is consuming the rest of the world. The moment you wake her by touching that egg, everything collapses into the actual present, the apocalypse, the ash, the end. Secret number 93. The transition that occurs when you touch Filianor's egg is among the most dramatic visual moments in From Software's history. The world dissolves and reassembles. The Ringed City as it was, magnificent, ancient, preserved, gives way to the Ringed City as it actually is in the present moment, devastated, half buried in ash, the apocalypse already complete. Gale's ravaged form somewhere in the distance, the last of the pygmy lords long dead. The illusion Filianor maintained was the city. She was not sleeping for her own benefit. She was sleeping so that the city could continue to exist, and waking her is not liberation. It is the end of the last lie. Secret number 94. The Ringed Knights. The enormous armored figures who patrol the later areas of the DLC and who are among the most difficult enemies in the base game, were the original knights of the Ringed City. Warriors from the time before fire who fought in the Age of Gods and wore armor that was said to have been blessed with lightning and then imbued with something dark. Their lightning resistance and their dark attunement are both accurate to their description. They are relics of the same era as Gwyn himself, still fighting in a world that has ended around them, still maintaining their posts. Secret number 95. The Dreg Heap, the starting area of the Ringed City DLC, is where all things fall when the end of the world begins. Architectural styles from every era of the series are visible in the debris, pieces of buildings that echo the original Undead Burg, fragments that recall Drangleic from Dark Souls 2, structures from Lothric. Everything that was ever part of the Age of Fire is converging at the bottom, being compressed by the collapse of everything above it. The Dreg Heap is not a location in the usual sense. It is a temporal garbage pile, and navigating it means walking through history that has been rendered literally undifferentiated. Secret number 96. The Herald Legion Knights found in the Dreg Heap are enormous mace-wielding soldiers from a kingdom that existed in an earlier cycle, related by item description to Herald, a warrior king mentioned in passing in the lore of another game. They are here in the Dreg Heap because the Dreg Heap contains everything that was ever consumed by the Ages of Fire, every civilization that rose and fell and was buried in ash. They fell into the heap along with everything else from their era, and they still fight because that is all they knew how to do. Secret number 97. The small red-eyed creature found sitting near the entrance of the Ringed City proper, the Ringed City Hollow, who speaks to you in a conspiratorial tone and guides you toward Filianore, is implied by some lore researchers to be the furtive pygmy himself, or one of his most direct descendants, the oldest of the pygmy lords. If this is true, then the person who points you toward the DLC's most consequential moment is the original father of all humanity, the single most important figure in the series' backstory, sitting in a ruined city at the end of the world, waiting for someone who carries the dark sign to come and help him finish what was started at the beginning. Secret number 98. Dark Eater Midir is the last of the dragons raised by the gods, given a specific mandate to fight the dark eternally because his natural lifespan made him suitable for an eternal duty. His description is one of the most quietly devastating in the game. Descended from the archdragons, Midir was raised by the gods, and owing to his immortality was given a duty to eternally battle the dark, a duty that he would never forget, even after the gods perished. He fights you not because he wants to, but because his duty has outlasted everyone who gave it to him. The gods who assigned him his purpose are gone. He keeps fighting darkness anyway, and at this point in history the darkness may well be indistinguishable from everything else, but he cannot stop. Secret number 99. Midir can be made to fall off a bridge before the main encounter with him, sending him down into a pit that leads to a hidden boss arena below. That optional version of the fight, in the cramped space beneath the shared grave, is considered by many players to be one of the hardest encounters in the entire game. The difference in challenge is also lore appropriate. Fighting Midir on his bridge is fighting him in the open, where his full wingspan has meaning. Fighting him in the pit is fighting him in the dark, where his fire is the only light and there is nowhere to run. The same enemy, completely different experience. The environment carries as much information as the enemy. Secret number 100. The pygmy lords who guard the throne room before Filianor's chamber are described as the descendants of the furtive pygmy who inherited the dark soul. By the time you reach them, they are little more than animated husks, their bodies degraded, their minds almost entirely gone, still sitting on their individual thrones in a throne room that exists at the bottom of a world that is ending. They managed the dark soul across all the ages. They contained it. They protected it. They sacrificed everything to keep it sealed, and Gale found them and consumed their blood to take the dark soul as pigment. The entire line of humanity's original royalty ended as a meal. Secret number 101. The Spears of the Church Covenant, which pits you against a player-controlled defender inside Filianor's domain, is described as an order dedicated to protecting Filianor's slumber. The Covenant is active and functional in online play. People are still joining this order and being summoned to defend a sleeping god even now, in the present of the game. The institution of protection outlasted any understanding of what is being protected or why. The spears guard Filianor, not because they have weighed the merits of waking her against keeping her asleep, but because that is what the institution says spears do: institutional preservation over actual purpose. The cycle's most basic pattern, still running. Secret number 102. The shared grave bonfire area, which you access after waking Filianor, has a name that needs thinking about. Shared grave. Every version of the world that ever burned, every cycle that ever completed, shares this space at the end. It is not one grave. It is all of them, overlapping, compressed into the same location because all endings lead to the same place. The bonfire there does not represent rest or safety in the usual sense. It represents the unavoidable fact that all fires go out. The Dreg Heap as compressed history. The first area of the Ringed City DLC is not the city itself, but the garbage dump at the bottom of the time. The Dreg Heap, where everything that existed in the Age of Fire has eventually settled. What makes the Dreg Heap fascinating on a lore level is the specificity of its layers. You can identify architectural elements from Lothric, from the Cathedral of the Deep, from what looks like Irithyll. As you descend, the architecture gets older, the design language more primitive, until you reach the level of the Ringed City itself, which is not just old, but primordial, built before the conventions of later ages had been established. Walking down through the Dreg Heap is walking through a compressed cross-section of everything the Age of Fire built and abandoned. History, in this world, does not disappear. It just settles. The angels and what they were. The winged angels that attack you in the Dreg Heap are described in their soul item as the result of humans who gave themselves over entirely to the divine, who completed the process of hollowing in service of the gods so thoroughly that they became something non-human. They are described as the final form of a pilgrim who has fully submitted to the gods' order. This is significant because the entire Age of Fire was organized around the idea of human souls serving the divine flame, of people burning themselves in service of the fire's continuation. The angels are what happens at the end of that logic. People who gave so completely that they stopped being people. They float on giant wings over the ruins of everything, attacking anything that moves, serving nothing, because the institution they served is gone, and no one told them to stop. The Spear of the Church Covenant and its irony. The Spear of the Church Covenant invades other players' games as a boss-level opponent to protect the sleeping Filianor, but Filianor's sleep is not protection. It is the mechanism by which the Ringed City has been kept isolated from time, frozen in a moment before the city's destruction became visible. The Spears of the Church are protecting a temporal illusion. They are guarding a dream. When that dream ends, when you wake Filianor, the city they were defending is revealed to be ash. The covenant of devoted protectors has been maintaining, with great effort and genuine sacrifice, the conditions under which no one could see what had already happened. Their devotion is to the continuation of a deception. This is, in concentrated form, what the entire Age of Fire has always required of its most devoted servants. Gale's first appearance and context. Now that we have been through the entire game, return to that image of Gale crouching beside a bonfire in the Cathedral of the Deep. He is there before any of the DLC is accessible. He is waiting for a champion before the Painted World arc has begun, before the Ringed City questline has started, before any of the events that will make his mission make sense to the player. He is already in motion. He has already decided. The gentleness with which he asks for your help, calling you champion, asking about a painter, speaking of pigment as though it is the most urgent thing in any world, is not the introduction of a side character. It is the opening note of a symphony whose final movement does not sound until 30 hours later, in a dead red desert at the end of everything, when you finally understand what the red cape means and what the crossbow cost him and why he called you champion when you had not yet done a single thing to deserve it. He called you champion because he needed you to become one. He believed in what you could do before you had done any of it. That is, in the end, what this whole story is about. Part 10. Slave Knight, Gale, the hidden details of the Ringed City, and the final 33 secrets. There is a man at the edge of the world who has been waiting for a very long time. You first meet Slave Knight Gale in the Cathedral of the Deep, before any of the DLC is unlocked, crouched beside a bonfire in a tattered red hood, asking you a question about a painter. He seems harmless, weary. He calls you champion, and there is nothing ironic in it. He means it. and the sincerity of it is quietly disarming. He asks if you will help him find a way to the painted world. He says a child there needs pigment. He says the world she is painting needs the dark soul as its foundation. He says he is going to go ahead of you, to look for it, and he asks that when you find your way to the end of everything, you bring him what he needs. You do not understand this at the time. Most players assume he is a side character, a flavor NPC, someone to give a mission to and then forget. He is not a side character. He is the emotional center of everything that follows. He is, in a very real sense, the answer to the question the entire trilogy has been asking about what love looks like in a world designed to prevent it. Secret number 103. Slave Knight. Gale's armor describes him as having served as a slave knight, the lowest rank in the Ringed Knights hierarchy, not even properly part of the Ringed City, but attached to it as a servant, for so long that his body has been fundamentally altered. He is old in a way that goes beyond years. He has been through so many cycles, absorbed so much dark of humanity, that by the time you face him in the final arena at the literal end of time, he has become something that is barely recognizable as the gentle, red-hooded man who crouched beside a fire in the cathedral. Secret number 104. The final arena where you fight Gale is worth examining in extraordinary detail. It is a flat, featureless expanse of nothing. Not a room, not an architecture, not even a landscape in any recognizable sense. It is what exists when you go so far forward through time that the world itself has run out of material to fill the space with. The sky is dark red. The ground is a kind of faded ash-gray nothingness. In the distance there are the remnants of the Ringed City, compressed and crumbling, visible as ruins through the haze. This is the end of the Age of Fire. This is what every cycle of linking the flame was ultimately fighting to delay, and you are standing in it. The fight with Gale is not taking place at the end of a game. It is taking place at the end of everything. Secret number 105. Gale's moveset in the final boss fight contains references to virtually every type of combat seen throughout the DLC. He uses the chain anchor like a weapon, swings it with a kind of wild improvised fury that reflects his nature as someone who was never a trained warrior. He is a slave knight. He fights like someone who learned to fight from desperation rather than instruction. In the second phase of the fight, when he begins to draw on the power of the consumed pygmy lord's dark soul, his attacks become shot through with red lightning that is visually distinct from any other lightning in the game. This is not the gold lightning of Gwyn. This is something older and more human. This is the raw power of the dark soul, expressing itself through a man who has taken more of it into himself than any single person was ever meant to carry. Secret number 106. When Gale dies, the cutscene shows the blood of the dark soul seeping out of him into the ground. The painter, in the aftermath, is shown collecting this blood as pigment. The world she makes with it is described in her dialogue in the Ashes of Arundel DLC as cold, dark, and very gentle. This description is precise. It is not dystopian. It is not utopian. It is a world that will not require the burning of anyone. A world that accepts its own nature rather than requiring constant heroic sacrifice to maintain an alternative. The thing that all those cycles of linking the fire were delaying is, in the hands of a child painter with a very old man's sacrifice as her material, going to become something worth living in. Whether this constitutes a happy ending or merely a less catastrophic one is left, as always, to your own reading. Secret number 107. Gale was sent by the painter to find the Dark Soul long before the events of the base game. His appearance in the Cathedral of the Deep, where he sits waiting for a champion to help him get into the painted world, implies that he had already searched most of the accessible world for the Dark Soul before deciding that it could not be found through ordinary means. He had already concluded that the Dark Soul, the ancient inheritance of humanity, could only be found at the very end of time, after the last pygmy lords had been consumed, after everything else was over. And having concluded this, he waited. He waited in the Cathedral of the Deep, in that red hood, patient and tired, for someone who might be able to help the painter access the painted world, so that she would at least have a place to work, while he went to the end of everything to get what she needed. He designed his own death into his plan. He knew he would be consumed by the dark soul he was trying to collect. He went anyway. Secret number 108. The red hood Gale wears is his most immediately recognizable feature, and its color is not incidental. Red, in the Dark Soul's color vocabulary, is the color of humanity, of the dark soul, of the bloodstain mechanic that shows where other players died, of the red-eye orbs used for invasion. Gale has been wearing the color of humanity on his head his entire life. He is not a great warrior. He is not a lord. He is not a god. He is the representative of ordinary humanity at the end of everything, carrying humanity's color into the final dark. Secret number 109. There is a detail in Gale's boss introduction that easy to miss on a first playthrough. He says, "I am no champion." He says it clearly, without false modesty. He knows what he is. He went anyway. This is perhaps the most precise articulation of the game's moral argument that the game ever makes. Dark Souls 3 is not a story about heroes. It is a story about people who do the thing that needs to be done, despite knowing what they are and what they are not. Gale knew he was not a champion. He became the most important person in the history of the world by going anyway, because no one else would. Secret number 110. In the Ringed City DLC, there is an area called the Dreg Heap, the garbage dump at the end of time, where the detritus of every collapsed civilization has settled in a vast, compressed tower of history. The architectural layers of this heap are chronologically ordered from top to bottom, with the most recent structures nearest the surface and the oldest material at the bottom. Walking down through the Dreg Heap is walking backward through the entire history of the Dark Souls universe. You pass through Lothric architecture, then through what looks like the architecture of Irithyll, then through things that look like the ruins of Anor Londo, and eventually you reach the Ringed City itself, which was sealed away at the very bottom of history. The entire game's journey, compressed and inverted. You reach the beginning by going to the end. Secret number 111. The Half-Light, Spear of the Church boss fight, which replaces a human invader in multiplayer with an AI in offline play, is protecting a sleeping woman in a ruined church. That woman is Filianor, and she is sleeping under the protective wing of a hollow shell of a god, attended by knights whose purpose they have entirely forgotten, waiting for a champion who was supposed to come and has not come. The church she sleeps in is beautiful in the way that long-abandoned sacred spaces are beautiful, with the specific pathos of a place that was built for a purpose that it will now never serve. When you wake Filianor, the temporal illusion of the Ringed City collapses, and you see what the city actually looks like in the real present. Ruins, ash, emptiness. The beauty was a dream. The city it was dreaming of died a very long time ago. Secret number 112. Filianor's egg. When you interact with her to wake her, you find she is holding a small egg. This egg is described in item lore as being cracked, as having been cracked for as long as anyone can remember, and as never hatching. Some scholars in the lore community interpret the egg as a symbol of the gift that was promised to the Pygmy Lords and never delivered, the warmth of the fire, the belonging to the divine order, the acceptance that they were told would come when they were sent to the Ringed City with the promise of Filianor's protection. The promise was hollow. The egg was always going to be hollow. The Pygmy Lords waited in the Ringed City, in the stasis of Filianor's dream, for something that was never going to arrive. The cracked egg is Gwyn's promise, still unhatched after all this time. Secret number 113. The Pygmy Lords themselves are found in the hidden inner sanctum of the Ringed City, seated on thrones like a parody of the Lords of Cinder at Firelink Shrine. They are hollow, barely recognizable as human. Their dark soul has been divided and diluted across so many generations of humanity that each individual lord carries only a fragment of it. Gale, having consumed them all, carries the whole of what remains. He is humanity's collected dark soul, walking. He is every person who ever carried a piece of that inheritance, compressed into one man in a red hood at the end of the world. Secret number 114. The Ringed City was built as a gift and a cage simultaneously. Gwyn could not destroy the Pygmy Lords. They were too important to the structure of the world, their dark soul too essential to the fire's operation. But he could not have them present during the Age of Fire. They were the contradiction at the center of his cosmology, beings whose very existence demonstrated that the fire was not the natural state of the world, that it had been claimed rather than created. So he gave them a city at the edge of the world, beyond the reach of time, and he gave them Filianor as both a guardian and a seal, and he told them that the sun would reach them in time. Then he ensured that time would not reach them at all. Secret number 115. The Herald's set of armor, worn by Lap in the Ringed City DLC, is fascinating because it describes Lap as a hollow who has completely lost his memory, wandering the Ringed City looking for treasure. His real identity, which the player can help him uncover, is Unbreakable Patches. The most persistent survivor of every cycle in the game's universe forgot who he was while wandering the end of time. Even Patches, who has survived everything, reaches the absolute limit of the world and finds that something essential has been lost. He recovers himself, eventually, with help. He immediately uses that recovery to try to rob you. This is, arguably, the most Patches thing that has ever happened in a From Software game. Secret number 116. There is a path in the Ringed City that leads to a shaded, tree-canopied walkway overlooking what used to be an enormous garden. If you look carefully at the statues along this walkway, they are pygmy figures, small, dark-featured, in poses of supplication. This was the ceremonial approach to Filianor's church. The pygmy lords walked this path when they came to pay their respects to their supposed protector. The scale of the statues, smaller than human, placed lower than the eye naturally falls, means most players walk past them without noticing. They are the pygmies making themselves small, as they were told to, in the city that was built to keep them out of sight. Secret number 117. Gale's broken crossbow, the one he carries and which is useless in his boss fight, is described as having been bent and twisted beyond repair through his years of wandering. He never repaired it. He kept it, despite being unable to use it, for reasons the game never explains. The most common interpretation is that it was given to him by the painter before he left on his quest, a keepsake, something to carry. A man at the end of the world, holding a broken weapon from the girl he serves, unable to fix it, but refusing to discard it. There is an entire character study contained in that detail. Secret number 118. The Ringed Knights. The enormous armored soldiers that guard the Ringed City's outer walls predate the Dark Sign. They are among the oldest enemies in the game, part of the founding generation of the Age of Fire. Their armor is described as having been fused to their bodies by the fire during the war against the dragons, as though they walked through something so hot that the metal became part of them. They have been standing at those walls for longer than the Dark Sign has existed. They are the Pygmy Lord's original guards, placed there to protect, or contain, the city, and they are still at their posts at the end of everything, in a city that has been ruins for eons, guarding walls that no longer protect anything except ash. Secret number 119. Look at the sky above the Ringed City before you wake Filianor. It is perpetual sunset, the same quality of fading golden light that you see everywhere in the base game, the visual metaphor for the Age of Fire in decline. When Filianor is woken and the illusion collapses, the sky becomes dark red and empty. The sunset was the dream. What follows it is not a sunrise. Secret number 120. The desert pyromancer Zoe, who appears as a summon sign in the Ringed City DLC, comes from a lineage of pyromancers who learned their craft from Quilana of Izalith, the daughter of the Witch of Izalith, the sole survivor of the Chaos Flame catastrophe. This pyromantic tradition, passed down from teacher to student across the entire span of the Age of Fire, has traveled all the way to the literal end of time, carried by a woman in a desert robe who will help you fight the second-to-last boss in the game. Knowledge survives in ways that monuments do not. The fire of the Witch of Izalith's teaching is still burning, in a form she would barely recognize, at the edge of the last world. Secret number 121. The Great Soul Dreg sorcery, found in the Ringed City, is described as the remnants of Aldrich's appetite, not his power, not his soul, but his hunger, extracted and crystallized into a spell. Aldrich was consumed by the deep. His body is gone. But his hunger, apparently, is persistent enough to survive as its own form of energy, usable as a weapon. The deep took everything human out of him and left the hunger behind as a kind of residue. This is the game's most precise statement about what the deep actually does. It does not destroy, it distills. It takes a person and removes everything except the deepest appetites. Secret number 122. There is a juxtaposition hidden in the item lore around the Spears of the Church Covenant. The Covenant is dedicated to the protection of Filianor, to the defense of the Ringed City, and its description frames this as a sacred duty, an honor given to the greatest warriors. But Filianor is asleep in a ruined church at the end of time, guarding an egg that will never hatch, in a city that is already ash. The most sacred duty in the Ringed City is the protection of something that cannot be saved. The honor of being a spear of the church is the honor of standing guard at a monument to a promise that was broken before the ceremony was finished. Secret number 123. The weapon Frayed Blade, obtained from the soul of Dark Eater Midir, is described as having been made from a sword that was once used in the dark purging ceremonies, rituals performed by the Ringed Knights to cleanse themselves of the Deep's influence. The blade is frayed because it has been used for these ceremonies so many times that the metal itself has begun to unravel. Even the swords of the Ringed City's oldest warriors could not withstand repeated proximity to the Deep without being altered by it. The Deep changes everything it touches. The fraying is not deterioration, it is transformation. Secret number 124. Dark Eater Midir himself, the enormous dragon who guards the passage to the Ringed City's inner sanctum, was given to the Ringed City by the gods specifically to fight the Deep. He has been fighting the Deep alone for an unimaginable span of time. His eyes have been partly consumed by it. He still fights. He still guards. He is one of the most tragic figures in the game, a creature given an impossible duty, set to it before he could consent or refuse, and still carrying it out long after everyone who assigned it to him has died or abandoned the world. When you defeat Midir, his soul's description says simply that his heart, swollen with the dark, is a mighty weapon. He was supposed to eat the dark so it would not spread. He ate so much of it that it has become inseparable from what he is. Secret number 125. There is a hidden room beneath the Ringed City's inner sanctum that contains a fresco depicting the events of the founding of the Age of Fire. In this fresco, which requires careful platforming and exploration to reach, the Pygmy Lords are depicted on one side and the gods on the other, with the first flame between them. The Pygmy Lord's posture in the fresco is ambiguous. They are reaching toward the flame, but whether they are reaching for it or being pushed away from it is something the fresco's composition carefully refuses to resolve. The founding moment of the Age of Fire, the moment that set every subsequent cycle in motion, is presented as a scene in which the question of who took what from whom remains genuinely unclear. Secret number 126. The item description for the Divine Pillars of Light miracle, found in the Ringed City, states that it was the light of the gods, once used to worship them. The miracle was a tool of religious observance used by the Pygmy Lords to honor the gods who were supposed to protect them. It is now a weapon. The worship of the gods has been repurposed as a combat mechanic by the people the gods abandoned. There is a quiet fury in that transformation, even expressed in an item description, secret number 127. The Herald armor set, given by the Firekeeper to NPCs she considers her representatives in the world, is found in several locations throughout the game on enemies who have gone hollow. This means the Firekeeper has been sending people out into Lothric in her service, and those people have been dying and hollowing before completing whatever task she sent them to do. The Firekeeper is not a perfect guardian. She is a blinded woman in a shrine outside of time, trying to maintain a connection to a world that is already collapsing. She does what she can. It is not always enough. Secret number 128. The Titanite slab, the rarest upgrade material in the game, is described as a transient treasure, not as something precious in itself, but as something that happens to exist at the intersection of the Fire's expansion and the Dark's advance. It is the byproduct of the collision between the two forces that define the world. The most valuable thing in the upgrade system is not a product of divine craft or human ingenuity. It is an accident of the two oldest opposing forces pressing against each other. The best things in this world are, in this sense, accidents. Secret number 129. There is a fog that fills certain corridors in the Ringed City DLC that causes a specific visual effect, a kind of granular particulate quality, as though the air is full of something finer than ash. Particle analysis of this effect in comparison to similar effects elsewhere in the game suggests that this fog is made of the same material as the falling ash in the painted world of Ariandel. If this reading is correct, then the end of time in the Ringed City and the interior of the painted world exist in a shared atmospheric relationship, the end of the world bleeding into the painted world that might replace it, or vice versa. The boundary between what is ending and what is beginning is porous, in the way that all important boundaries in this world tend to be. Secret number 130. The description of the ringed knight-paired greatswords says that the blades were forged in the abyss and tempered by the fire of human pride. Human pride is presented here as a metallurgical force, as something with enough heat to temper a weapon. The ringed knights were the first humans to refuse the diminished position that Gwyn assigned to humanity. Their weapons are literally made from the combination of what humanity fundamentally is, the abyss, the dark, the deep soul, and what humanity refuses to accept, a lesser status than the gods. The most powerful melee weapon in the DLC is a weapon forged from refusal, secret number 131. The small envoy banner, which allows you to travel to the Dreg Heap in the first place, is described as belonging to a messenger sent from Lothric to the Ringed City to summon the Pygmy Lords for the linking ceremony. The messenger never returned. The banner was never delivered. The Pygmy Lords were never summoned. The linking ceremony proceeded without them, with Lords of Cinder substituted for the Pygmy Lords' proper role, which is why the cycle is so unstable in Dark Souls 3's timeline. The ceremony has been run with the wrong components, with substitutions and workarounds, for cycles upon cycles, and the whole machinery is beginning to show the stress of its own improvisation. Secret number 132. There is a conversation you can have with the painter in the Ashes of Ariandel DLC after the main events of the expansion, in which she describes what she wants to paint. She does not describe a world that is better than Lothric or more beautiful than the painted world of Ariandel. She describes a world that is honest. She says she wants to paint a world where things are what they are, where the cold is cold and the dark is dark, and nothing is pretending to be a fire that it is not. The child at the center of the DLC's story, the one Gale devoted his life to serving, has the most sophisticated moral intuition of any character in the game. She understands, with the clarity that children sometimes have about the things adults have complicated into confusion, that the world needs honesty more than it needs warmth. Secret number 133. The name of the painting is never given. The world the painter creates is never named in any text. This is, one presumes, deliberate. The Age of Fire had a name. The Ringed City had a name. Lothric had a name. The new world being painted at the end of everything has no name, because it has not yet been made. And to name a thing before it exists is to constrain it with the shape of what came before. The painter is painting something that will not be a continuation of any previous world. It will be its own first thing. It cannot be named before it is real. Secret number 134. Across all 3 Dark Souls games, the endings are structurally the same. You make a choice, a cutscene plays, the credits roll, and then you can begin again. The cycle of the game mirrors the cycle of the world. Every time a player starts a new playthrough, they are, in a sense, relinking the fire, restarting the age that the game was set in, repeating the patterns with marginal variations, discovering new details about a world that remains fundamentally the same. The metastructure of the game is its lore. The act of playing Dark Souls 3 repeatedly is the act of being the cycle itself. You do not just observe the tragedy of the repeated linking of the fire. You perform it, over and over, every time you press New Game Plus. The game has, this entire time, been telling you about yourself as a player. Secret number 135. The very last piece of lore, the one that brings everything together. At the end of the Ringed City, after Gale is defeated, before you return to wherever the painter will make her new world, there is a moment of complete stillness. The red sky, the ash, the empty arena, the sound of wind. There is nothing left. Every kingdom that rose in the light of the first flame has fallen. Every god has died or fled. Every Lord of Cinder has been encountered and dealt with. The dark sign still marks you, but there is nothing left to link it to. The fire is gone. And in that stillness, if you look very carefully at the ground around where Gale fell, you will see that the blood he spilled, the blood of the Dark Soul, humanity's entire inheritance, has pooled in a pattern that suggests a heartbeat, a pulse in the ash. The Dark Soul is not destroyed. It has been collected. It is in the painter's hands now, as pigment, as material, as the foundation of whatever comes next. The world is not ending. It is changing what it is made of. The world was always changing what it was made of. That is what the fire was always about. Not warmth, not survival, not the preservation of the divine order. It was about buying time for something new to be made in the shelter of the light. Every cycle of linking the fire, every lord of cinder who burned, every unkindled who rose from the ash and walked through Lothric doing what was asked of them, they were all, without knowing it, buying time. Buying time for a child in a painted world to grow up and learn to paint, so that when a broken, tired man in a red hood arrived at the end of everything and spilled his life onto the ground, she would be ready to use it. This is the hidden story inside the hidden story. The fire was never the point. The painting is the point. The fire was just the long, slow work of creating the conditions in which a painting could be made. May whatever world she makes be worth everything it cost. Epilogue, the shape of the dark. There is a particular quality of darkness that exists only after very long light. If you have ever sat in a room where a fire has just gone out, not a big fire, not a disaster, just a fireplace at the end of an evening, you know the quality of dark I mean. It is not frightening, it is not cold, not yet. It still holds the memory of warmth in it, in the way that objects in the room are still slightly visible, not from any light that remains, but from the heat that the walls and the floors have absorbed over the hours of burning. The dark after a long fire is a gentler dark than ordinary darkness. It has been tempered by what preceded it. This is what Gale's sacrifice creates in the end. Not a world without dark. Not a new fire, not a new age of light and gods and burning lords of cinder and cycles repeating until the very structure of time comes apart. Just a dark that has been tempered. A dark that was made by someone who cared about what it would feel like to live in it. Dark Souls 3 is a game about endings. About the specific weight of being alive at the end of something enormous. When all the structures that gave life its shape are collapsing, when the things that were supposed to be eternal are failing, and the people who were supposed to know what to do don't know anymore. This is not an unfamiliar feeling, as feelings go. History is full of people who lived at the end of something enormous and had to decide what to do about it. What the game proposes, in its quiet and unhurried way, is that the correct response to the end of the world is not to pretend it is not ending, and not to despair that it is ending, but to make something honest from what remains, to take the blood that is spilled and use it as pigment, to take the ash and let a child shape it into a world that will be cold and dark and very gentle, because cold and dark and gentle is true, and the thing that came before it, however warm and golden and magnificent, was built on a lie. This is not a comfortable ending. It is not the kind of ending that sends you to bed feeling that everything worked out. But it is the kind of ending that sends you to bed thinking about what you build with the materials you have been given, about what it means to make something honest in a world full of beautiful, sustaining fictions. You have been in Lothric tonight, walking through its collapsed civilizations and its fading fires and its patient, broken, extraordinary people. You have sat with the lore that From Software hid in item descriptions and boss arenas and the placement of statues and corridors that most players never enter. You have given this strange and dark and carefully made world some of your attention, and the world, as it always does, has paid you back in kind. The fire is fading. It was always going to fade. Something is being painted in the dark, and it is going to be worth the wait. Sleep well, good night. Appendix, 15 more things that deserve your attention. There are details in Dark Souls 3 that resist easy categorization. Things that do not belong neatly to any single area or storyline, but sit at the intersections, illuminating multiple parts of the game at once. Before we close, here are 15 more. On the nature of the Estus Flask across games. The Estus Flask has been present in every Dark Souls game, and its descriptions have shifted subtly across each one. In the original, it is simply described as an emerald flask filled with the tears of the undead. In Dark Souls 2, it is a flask filled with the dregs of the fire, the lowest, densest part of the flame, filtered and collected. In Dark Souls 3, it is the crystallized tears of a firekeeper. Each iteration shifts what the healing draft is made of, in a way that tracks the fire's decline. First the tears of those the fire condemned, then the dregs of the fire itself, and finally the grief of the woman who tends it. The flask you drink from to survive this world is, in the final game, made of a specific woman's inability to stop caring about you, despite knowing what you are and what you will be used for. There is no purer expression of the Age of Fire's moral texture than that, on the undead settlement's relationship with the cathedral. The undead settlement, the village of people who are hollow and burning effigies and keeping a fragile grip on their own sanity through ritual and community, exists in a direct relationship of exploitation with the Cathedral of the Deep below it. The clerics of the cathedral regularly came to the settlement to collect the undead. The settlement's residents brought their own hollow relatives to be given to the cathedral as willing sacrifices, in the belief that this was an act of mercy, that being taken by the cathedral was better than the alternative of progressing into full hollowness in an isolated village with no support. The settlement's burning effigies, strung up on enormous wooden poles throughout the area, are not acts of violence against the undead. They are, from the settlement's perspective, acts of compassion, burning the hollow so they do not have to go to the cathedral. Mercy expressed as fire. This is Dark Souls 3's most compressed image of what happens when a community has no good options and must choose between forms of loss. On Irina and Igon, and what the faith arc is really about. Irina of Karim is a blind woman who wants to become a firekeeper. Igon of Karim is the knight sworn to protect her at any cost. The questline they share is, on the surface, about acquiring miracles. Irina reads tomes and sells you the spells they contain. But what the questline is actually about is the cost of knowledge to someone who lacks the protection against it. If you give Irina the dark tomes, the miracles of sin and suffering, she begins to absorb what they contain. She is affected by them in ways she cannot prevent. Her desire to help others, to be useful, exposes her to the very darkness that the dark miracles describe, and she cannot unsee what she has seen. Igon's protective devotion, which is genuine and completely sincere, cannot shield her from the damage done by the knowledge she chose to carry. Some things cannot be protected against. Some knowledge, once received, changes the person who received it in ways that no sword can prevent. On the Dragonslayer armor and what it means without a wearer. The Dragonslayer armor boss fight is against a set of armor with no one inside it. The description explains that the armor was animated by the Lothric royal family through an ancient ritual, sent to guard the bridge to the Grand Archives as a final line of defense. But the detail that lingers is not the mechanism of animation, but the condition of vacancy. A suit of armor built to slay dragons, worn by a legendary champion, maintained as a fortress defender for centuries, and now hollow. Not hollow in the way that persons go hollow, but architecturally empty. A purpose without a person, a function continuing past the existence of any consciousness that chose it. The Dragonslayer armor is a perfect Souls metaphor, all the equipment of a great life, still operating long after the life that gave it meaning, has departed. On Patches' location in Firelink and what it implies. Patches, when he appears in Firelink's shrine after his initial encounter in the Cathedral of the Deep, sets up shop in the corner beneath the main tower. He sells items. He complains about the environment. He occasionally tries to look innocent about his history of pushing people into pits. His presence in Firelink, which is, remember, a space that exists outside time, maintained as a sanctuary across cycles, is casually accepted by the other inhabitants of the shrine, as though it is perfectly normal that a merchant of flexible ethics has set up a stall in the liminal space between the worlds. The Firekeeper, who is profound and ancient, does not appear to find Patches remarkable. This says something about both the Firekeeper's priorities and Patches' ability to make himself seem like a natural part of whatever space he inhabits. He belongs everywhere because he insists on belonging, and insistence in this world is most of what belonging requires. On the music of the Dancer of the Boreal Valley, Yuka Kitamura, who composed much of Dark Souls 3's score, made an unusual choice for the Dancer boss fight. The music is waltz time, 3/4 timing, the rhythm that structures ballroom dance. The Dancer of the Boreal Valley, a servant of Pontiff Sulivan cursed with the Outrider night rings, driven into a frenzy of violence, moves to waltz music. The grace of her movements, which are genuinely beautiful even as they are killing you, is not incidental. The dancer remembers what she was. Her body was trained for performance, for ceremony, for a role in Irithyll society that required elegance. What she has become, a monster unable to control itself, flung into combat as Sulivan's instrument, retains the form of the person she used to be, expressed now only in the rhythm of her attacks, in the 3-beat pattern her violence has kept, even as everything else was stripped away. The most heartbreaking boss fight in Irithyll is a waltz, on the Pale Shade of Londor. The Pale Shade is an invader NPC who appears in Farron Keep and the Irithyll dungeon. If you betray Uria's questline, If you break the usurpation by talking to Henri rather than allowing the pilgrim to kill them, the pale shade appears and attacks you. Her item descriptions state that she is a servant of Uria, sent to execute those who betray the Sable Church. But her armor description also states that she has been drained of life to sustain her pallor, that she serves Uria in a state of deliberate self-diminishment. She is a loyal Hollow who has given herself over to Londor's cause so completely that she has accepted being made less than she was as the cost of her commitment. She is, in the politics of Londor, an example of exactly the kind of devoted self-erasure that the usurpation is supposed to liberate humanity from. The institution fighting for Hollow liberation requires the erasure of its own servants to function. The revolution eats its own, even here, on what the Firelink Shrine Tower key unlocks. You can purchase a key from the Shrine Handmaid that unlocks the tower adjacent to Firelink Shrine. At the top of the tower, you find a hanging cage with a Firekeeper's corpse inside, and near her, the eyes of a Firekeeper. Below the tower, in the area made accessible from the top, there is a shortcut back to the main shrine. The tower visit is optional. The eyes are optional. Most players buy the key because the key is there, and doors are for opening, but the tower exists in the game specifically for the Firekeeper ending, specifically for the player who has done enough of the game to find the eyes meaningful. The Shrine Handmaid charges 20,000 souls for the key. The Firekeeper ending, the one that requires the eyes, is available for free. The only thing the souls buy is the ability to find the eyes. The best ending in the game costs nothing but attention. On Hawkwood's final departure, after Hawkwood sends you the letter about the Dragonstone, and you defeat him in the optional duel in the Untended Graves, he disappears from Firelink Shrine. He does not die. He does not hollow. He leaves. The man who called himself a deserter, who spent the entire game being openly, honestly tired, who sat in the shrine and made no secret of his disillusionment, he goes to become something that is not a Lord of Cinder, not a hunter, not a hollow. He goes to become a dragon, not because it is heroic, because it is different, because the fire cycle has no claim on things that are not fire and not dark. He found the one exit from a world built with only 2 doors, and he walked through it. Hawkwood the deserter deserts one more time. This time, the desertion is the whole point. On the Forlorn questline and DS2's connection. The Forlorn are invader enemies who appear periodically throughout the game in versions of great weapons. A Forlorn with a great sword, a Forlorn with a scythe. Their lore describes them as people who have lost everything, including their world. People from other painted worlds or other ages who have been cast into Lothric through means they did not choose and cannot control. They invade not out of malice, but out of the specific quality of desperation, belonging to someone with nowhere to return to. Their armor description says they are welcome nowhere and belonged once to a world that no longer exists. They are ghosts in the most literal sense. The presence of people in a world that was never theirs, unable to leave and unable to stay, attacking because that is the only action available to them. The Forlorn are what homelessness looks like at the end of history, on the Profaned Flame, Pyromancy, and Why It Burns Blue. The Profaned Flame, one of the pyromancies found in the Irithyll dungeon, burns in a white gold rather than the orange-red of conventional fire. This distinction is not aesthetic. Conventional pyromancy in the Dark Souls series draws from the fire within humans, the small flame born of the dark soul that every person carries. The Profaned Flame draws from something external, something that exists independently of the person who channels it, a fire that burns because transgression sustains it, rather than because a human heart does. Its color is the color of fire that has become its own justification. White gold, bright, clean, and with nothing warm about it. On what the Untended Graves says about the cycle. The Untended Graves is Firelink Shrine in a state of abandonment, dark, hostile, its bonfire burning black, its usual inhabitants replaced by aggressive versions of themselves. The lore implication is that this is what Firelink Shrine becomes when no Ashen One arrives in time, when the cycle proceeds without a champion, when the fire fades without anyone being sent to rekindle it. The black bonfire is not a different bonfire. It is the same bonfire after. Champion Gundyr, found in the Untended Graves as an optional boss, is an unkindled who arrived after the fire had already faded, who reached the shrine to find it dark, and who has been waiting in the dark for what feels like an eternity. When you defeat him, you are not defeating an enemy. You are putting to rest the version of yourself that arrived too late. On the Ashen One, as a summary of the entire series. The Ashen One, you, the player character, is described as someone who tried to link the fire and failed, who burned without leaving a name, who was buried in ash and then pulled back. This history makes you, structurally, a person who has already done the thing the game asks you to do. You linked the fire once, and it was not enough. You are being asked to do it again, or to end it, or to take it, depending on which ending you choose. The Ashen One is the Dark Souls series admission that the cycle has been running so long that even the people who link the fire are recycled, that the same souls, the same acts, the same sacrifices are being performed again and again with diminishing results, and that the only way out is to finally, deliberately, choose differently. You are the person who has done this before. You are, in the game's most honest metaphor, the player. You have died in Lordran and Drangleic and Lothric. You have linked fires and watched them fade. You are back again because the cycle keeps bringing you back. The question the game has always been asking is whether you will do something different this time. On the final bonfire. There is a bonfire at the very end of the game, after the final boss is defeated and before the ending cinematic. It is called the Flameless Shrine. Its description says nothing. It is a bonfire with no location name, no lore entry, nothing. It exists so that you can rest for a moment before making your choice. The game gives you a bonfire after everything, after every sacrifice and every revelation and every boss and every secret uncovered. And the bonfire has no name because the place it is in has no name because you are at the end of everything, and everything that had names is gone. The last fire you sit at in Dark Souls 3 is anonymous. It is simply a fire, burning in the dark, asking nothing, judging nothing, keeping you company for as long as you need it, before you get up and make the last choice. That is what bonfires have always been, across every version of this world. Not salvation, not power, not the center of a religion or a cycle or a system of exploitation. Just a fire in the dark, around which people who have survived extraordinary difficulty can, for a moment, simply rest. The fire is fading. You already know what to do. If this journey through Lothric's lore meant something to you, if there was a secret here that made you sit up, or a detail that finally connected something you had been carrying around since your first playthrough, or a story you had not heard that made you want to go back and look at this world with fresh eyes, please subscribe to the channel. Every subscription is the thing that makes it possible to do this again, to go deeper into these worlds, to spend the time that thorough exploration requires. Leave a comment about the secret that hit hardest. I read every one of them, and they shape what comes next. The conversations in the comments under videos like this one are the real community, the ongoing argument about what the fire means and whether Gale was right, and what the painter will make with the blood of a man who believed in her enough to walk to the end of the world. Good night, Ashen One. The hunt can wait.